Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. The crunch came from right beside me, close enough that I felt my shoulder tense before I even turned my head. Gravel shifted, slow and deliberate, like someone walking at the exact same pace I was. But when I looked over, there was no one there. I was on the old river trail just outside Marlow Point, the stretch that ran along the bank before dipping under the bridge and looping toward the abandoned boat launch. It was just after 1 a.m., dark enough that the sky and water almost blended together. A fine mist hung low over the path, and the air smelled like wet stone and cold metal. My name's Corbin Hale, and I worked late shifts at the packaging plant down the road. Sometimes I walked home instead of driving just to clear my head. That trail was usually empty at night, just me, the river, and the distant hum of traffic. The crunch happened again, right beside me, same rhythm as my footsteps. I stopped walking, so did the sound. I stood there, heart rate picking up just slightly, listening. The only thing I could hear now was the faint lap of water against the shore and the soft hum of faraway engines. No breathing, no voices, no movement. I scanned the foggy path to my right, empty. Tall weeds swayed faintly, but nobody stood there. I shook my head, chalking it up to loose gravel shifting under my own steps or the weird way sound carried near water. I started walking again. Crunch, crunch, right beside me. The noise matched me perfectly. I stopped again. Silence. A strange pressure settled in my chest, not quite fear yet, but something close. More like the awareness that something was wrong enough to pay attention to. "Hello?" I called softly, my voice dissolving into the mist. No reply. I squinted through the fog, trying to make shapes out of shadows. Nothing. I shifted my weight forward and continued walking, keeping my eyes trained slightly to my right. The crunching resumed immediately. Even pace. Even spacing, as if another set of feet walked inches from mine. Except the path beside me stayed completely empty. My pulse started climbing now, slow and steady. Above me, the sky brightened faintly, not like lightning, just a pale movement creeping between the low clouds. I looked up automatically. A dim glow slid through the mist overhead, smooth and silent, like someone dragging soft light across the sky. It didn't illuminate the ground, it didn't flicker, it just moved. When I looked back down, the crunching was still there, beside me, but no one stood there. I slowed down, myself now unsure if stopping again would make it closer or make it disappear entirely. The glow above drifted out of sight, swallowed by the heavier cloud line. The footsteps remained. Crunch, crunch. Every time my boot met the gravel, something unseen mirrored it. My breath felt tight now. I forced myself to keep moving, telling myself it had to be something normal. Wind. Echo. The way damp gravel settled. None of those explanations sounded convincing. Another few yards and the trail curved slightly. The river reflected faint patches of moonlight, broken by fog drifting across its surface. The crunch moved with me around the bend. Right there. Always right there. I stopped suddenly and turned my body fully toward the source, just to confront the empty space head-on. Nothing stood on the path. No silhouette. No shape. Just fog and the faint outline of the railing along the river edge. My skin prickled along my arms. "Cut it out," I muttered to absolutely nothing. The crunch didn't answer. Instead, the air shifted. The glow returned above, brighter this time, sliding silently between the clouds like a smudge of pale light moving against the night. It passed directly overhead, slow and steady. The world around me felt muted, like sound had dropped half a level. Then the crunching sound moved slightly ahead of me, as if whatever had been walking beside me had stepped forward. I froze completely. The gravel shifted again a few feet in front. Still nobody there. My breathing came shallow, controlled, my eyes darting between the ground and the sky. The glow thinned and faded once more, leaving only the fog and dark clouds in its place, and then the footsteps stopped. Dead silent again. The air remained heavy. No more crunch. No more light. I stood there for a few seconds, unsure if I should feel relief or more concern. When I finally took a cautious step, no sound answered beside me, just my own boot on stone. I walked a little faster now, trying to put distance between me and that spot. My eyes still flicked upward every few seconds just in case the faint glow returned. It didn't, but the feeling didn't leave. A few hundred yards later, that sense of being followed crept back in slowly like the quiet before a storm. Crunch. Right behind me this time. I didn't turn immediately, I just felt it, the weight of it, the presence without form. The gravel shifted once, then again, directly behind my heels. I squeezed my fists, heart pounding now. "Not tonight," I whispered. When I finally turned, expecting at least something to reveal itself, the path remained empty behind me too. The fog lay thick, swallowing the darker parts of the trail. My weak flashlight beam pierced only a few yards ahead, and above, the glow formed once more, faint and ghost-like, sliding lazily through the low sky as though it knew exactly where I stood below. The footsteps didn't follow this time, they just lingered in memory. The glow passed on and disappeared into the clouds without a sound. Slowly, I turned back toward the trail home and walked with purpose now, not running, but not lingering either. Each step I took felt watched, weighed, like something invisible paced in parallel again without letting itself be seen. But the crunch never returned. By the time I reached the edge of the neighborhood and the first streetlights flickered into view, the air finally felt lighter, the pressure easing. The normal sounds of the town filtered in, a distant car, a dog barking, wind moving through trees. I stopped once more before leaving the trail completely and looked back. Fog, river, gravel path, nothing else. The sky above settled into its usual darkness, no more drifting glow, no strange brightness. But as I made the final walk toward my house, gravel crunching now only under my own feet, I couldn't shake the certainty that at some point tonight something had walked beside me that never intended to show its face. The reflection slid across my windshield in a smooth line, pale and slow, and when I checked the mirrors, there wasn't a single car behind me. I was driving south on Route 46 just outside of Camden Falls, the stretch that cut through open farmland and scattered tree lines before looping back toward the highway. It was late, maybe around 9:30, still warm but cooling off fast. The sky held that dusty purple look you get right after sunset, and thin clouds drifted quietly across the fading light. My name's Darren Klein, and I'd made that drive enough times to know how headlights usually played across the glass. This wasn't that. The reflection moved left to right across the windshield like something passed overhead or alongside the car, just out of view. It had a dull, milky glow to it. Not sharp, not bright enough to blind me, just enough to make me aware that something had shifted. I glanced up at the rearview mirror. Empty road, no headlights, no approaching glow. Then I looked up through the windshield. For a brief moment, the sky looked lighter. Not a sudden flash, not a beam, just faintly brighter, like someone nudged the exposure up and then back down again. My hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "What was that?" I muttered. The road ahead looked normal. The next stretch of fence posts blurred by. Tree shadows spilled across the pavement as usual. Everything else stayed the same. A few seconds later, it happened again. The reflection glided across the glass, slightly higher this time, like it traced an arc. Still no car approached. Still no light source anywhere that made sense. I slowed down a little, easing off the gas. The air inside the car felt thicker somehow, even though the windows were cracked open. I could hear crickets and the faint whine of tires on pavement, but underneath it all lingered a strange awareness, as if the space around me had shifted just slightly out of alignment. I flicked on my brights for a moment, scanning the roadside. Nothing. No figures, no animals, no parked vehicles, just empty fields and a darkening sky. Another subtle reflection slid across the windshield, slower this time. When it reached the edge of the glass, it faded out instead of continuing like a normal beam would. And again, the sky beyond it dimmed back to its natural tone. My heartbeat picked up just enough that I noticed it. "All right, enough," I said, louder now. I pulled the car closer to the shoulder and rolled nearly to a stop, eyes fixed on the open space ahead. The world outside stayed calm. Wind stirred the tops of tall grass faintly. Mosquitoes buzzed near the hood. I waited. Nothing happened for a few seconds. Then slowly, the glow returned. This time, it didn't just brush the windshield. It hovered faintly above it, like a pale haze drifting across the glass, smooth and deliberate. Still silent, still untethered to anything visible. The sky behind it grew slightly brighter again, almost glowing, but the road underneath stayed dim and unchanged. No reflection on the hood, no clear source, just light suspended in the wrong place. I swallowed hard. The glow slid off the edge of the windshield and disappeared, leaving behind the same empty stretch of darkness. I sat there, still idling, pulse steady but alert, eyes scanning every direction. To my right, the field stretched low and flat, broken only by a line of lone trees. To my left, the road curved out of sight, but there was nothing, no explanation materializing. I forced myself to keep breathing slow, steady, like if I pretended it wasn't happening, it might just go away. After another minute, I eased the car forward and continued driving, a little slower than before. A few hundred yards later, the reflections swept across the windshield again, this time brighter, sharper, and the sky flashed faintly for just a split second, as though something large had passed between whatever light source existed and the ground below. My throat went dry. The glow traced a smooth curve and then faded, gone as quickly as it arrived. I glanced at the sky again. Nothing moved except thin clouds drifting lazily. I checked my mirrors for the third or fourth time. No one followed. No headlights, no distant glow. The road stayed as empty as it had been when I turned onto it. Still, the feeling didn't fade. A sense of being watched crept in slowly, not like sudden panic, but like quiet awareness pressing at the edges of my nerves. Like something unseen had noticed me noticing it. I turned the radio on for distraction, letting some low-volume music fill the car. It helped break the tension just enough to make the quiet feel less unbearable. Still, my eyes kept darting up to the windshield, waiting for that smooth, pale line to return. And it did. Again and again, spaced out, subtle, controlled. Always silent. Always leaving the sky a shade lighter for just a fleeting moment. Eventually, as town lights appeared ahead, the phenomenon stopped. The reflections didn't appear anymore. The sky stayed its normal dark blue shade. Streetlights cast their predictable orange glow on the pavement. Cars passed in the opposite direction, grounded and real. I breathed easier without realizing it. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the odd light felt unreal, like a half-remembered image from a dream. But the tension in my shoulders told me it had been something more than imagination. I sat in the parked car for a moment, staring through the windshield where that reflection had moved. Nothing now. Only the soft glow of my front porch and the quiet hum of the world around me. Inside, my apartment felt warm and familiar. I set my keys down, poured a glass of water, tried to shake the lingering sense that the road had shared something with me that night. Later, when I stepped onto the small balcony to get some air, I glanced up at the sky again, half expecting that faint brightness to return. It didn't. The darkness settled naturally over the neighborhood, calm and ordinary. Still, the memory of that slow, deliberate glow sticking to glass that no light source could explain stayed lodged in my thoughts far longer than I'd like to admit. The forest went quiet so fast it felt like someone had muted it. I noticed it mid-sentence, halfway through complaining to myself about the cheap tent zipper snagging again. One second there were crickets, beetles clicking against leaves, the low, steady buzz that always filled the air this time of night. The next, there was nothing, not a single chirp. I stopped moving and just listened. Silence. Not peaceful silence. Heavy silence. I was camping alone at Lake Arbordale, a small wooded site a half hour outside of Harrier's Point. It was early fall, still warm enough for mosquitoes, but cool enough to keep the sweat from sticking. The sky had been clear earlier, but low clouds had started rolling in around dusk, smudging the stars and making the trees look taller than usual. My name's Colin Dreyer. I'd done solo trips plenty of times. I knew the normal sounds of the woods. This wasn't normal. I stepped out from the tent, boots sinking slightly into the soft dirt. The lake shimmered faintly to my left, reflecting a weak sliver of moonlight that kept disappearing behind the clouds. Everything felt too still, like the air itself had paused. Seriously, I muttered, scanning the tree line. No movement. Leaves hung limp. Even the wind had died down. Then I saw it. A dim light hovered just above the tree line on the far side of the clearing. Not bright, not sharp, just a soft, pale glow sitting there, barely illuminating anything around it. It didn't cast beams. It didn't flicker. It looked like someone had drawn a faint circle of light and left it suspended in the air. I stared at it, unsure if I should blink. It wasn't rising, it wasn't falling, just there. My stomach tightened in a slow, creeping way. "Okay," I whispered. "Nope." The silence around me felt wrong, like everything that usually lived out here had decided to hold its breath. The only sound I could hear was my own, shallow breathing. The glow shifted slightly, just a few inches, drifting sideways like it was following a path I couldn't see. The trees beneath it didn't brighten, the ground didn't reflect it. It existed without touching anything around it. I took one step back, then another. The dim light slid a little higher and then slowly dipped, as if fading behind the top of the trees without actually moving away. And then it vanished. Just gone. No flicker. No trail. No sign it had ever been there. Right after, the insects slowly crept back into the night, one chirp at a time, building until the forest sounded alive again. But the normal noise felt forced, like an echo of how things were supposed to be. I stood frozen, staring at the space where the light had hung. "Just pack up," I said to myself, voice barely steady. "Just pack and go." Still, I didn't move right away. I kept looking as if I might spot it again or catch some explanation trying to emerge from the darkness. Nothing did. Finally, I turned back toward the tent and started shoving things into my bag with more force than necessary. I zipped it closed, slung it over my shoulder, and tried not to let my eyes wander too much. The walk back to the trailhead felt longer than it had earlier. Every small crack of a branch made my shoulders tense. Every brief rustle of leaves drew my attention sharp as a knife. About halfway down the path, something odd happened again. The night sounds dulled. Not full silence this time, but softened, as if a layer had been placed between me and the world. The air felt thick, almost pressurized. I slowed. Faintly ahead through the trees, I saw another glow. Smaller this time. Lower. It brushed the forest floor for a split second before lifting upward and dissolving into the darkness. My heartbeat thudded harder now. I didn't want to follow it. I also didn't want to turn my back on whatever direction it might choose next. So I stood there, frozen, waiting for something else to happen. It didn't. The glow never returned. The forest resumed its normal soundtrack, almost too cheerful in contrast. By the time I reached the parking area, my hands were shaky, even though the night air wasn't cold. I opened the trunk, tossed my pack inside, and got into the driver's seat with more relief than I'd expected. I sat there for a minute, just breathing, listening to the quiet tick of cooling metal. The headlights cut a familiar, safe path through the trees ahead. I glanced once more toward the tree line. Dark. Unremarkable. Just forest. The drive home felt endless, my eyes jumping to every bit of reflected light off the roadside. But nothing followed. Nothing appeared above the trees. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the porch light and familiar sight of my house calmed my nerves a little. Still, I didn't fully relax until I locked the door behind me. Inside, everything hummed with ordinary life. Refrigerator, ceiling fan, the faint glow of my phone charging. I checked the time, 11:42 p.m. Only an hour had passed since I'd noticed the silence in the woods, but it felt much longer. I made some tea just to steady my hands, standing at the kitchen window while it cooled. Outside, the trees along the edge of my yard swayed quietly. No strange light, no silence. Everything looked exactly how it always had. But sometime around 2 in the morning, when sleep still wouldn't come, I heard it again. A moment of stillness. Just a second, where the world outside felt muted. Then a very faint glow brushed the tops of the distant trees beyond my backyard, pale and brief, like a whisper of the same thing from the lake, and then it slipped away, leaving the night unchanged. The security light snapped on so suddenly it pulled me right out of my thoughts. I'd been standing at the kitchen sink halfway through rinsing a mug, barely paying attention to anything, when the backyard flooded with bright white light. The whole space outside the window lit up sharp and clean, like someone had flipped a switch just for me. My name's Evan Portillo, and the motion light almost never came on unless a raccoon wandered through or my neighbor's cat cut across the fence. It was around 11:20 at night, cold enough that my breath fogged the window when I leaned closer. The street was quiet, the whole neighborhood dim and still. I dried my hands on a towel and stepped closer to the glass, squinting out into the yard. Nothing moved. No animal. No shadow. No rustle of leaves. The security light washed over the grass, the old oak tree near the fence, and the narrow path of stepping stones I barely ever used. Everything looked exactly the same as it had 10 seconds earlier, just brighter now. I waited for something to shift. It didn't. The light stayed on, unblinking, as if it had found movement and frozen on that exact point. My chest tightened a bit. "That's weird," I muttered. I flipped off the kitchen light and stared harder. The yard was perfectly still, like time had decided to pause just out there and nowhere else. Even the usual sound of night insects felt faded. The curtains moved slightly behind me as cool air flowed through the cracked window, but outside the grass didn't sway. The oak leaves didn't twitch. The hedge near the fence stood frozen mid-motion. I stepped closer to the back door. Nothing. Just empty yard, glowing under harsh security light. After about 15 seconds, the light shut off. The darkness that followed felt heavier than it should have. I stood there staring into the unlit yard, suddenly more aware of how quiet everything had become. No rustle, no breeze, no normal nighttime noise, just still air and shadow. A strange unease crept in slowly, the kind that made the back of my neck tingle without giving me a clear reason to run. It wasn't panic. It was like the air itself felt off. I unlocked the back door without really thinking, pushed it open a few inches, and stepped onto the porch. Cold air wrapped around my arms immediately. The scent of damp soil clung faintly in the night. The yard stretched ahead, dark and silent. "And now you're just messing with me," I said quietly, half joking, half not. I took a cautious step off the porch and onto the stone path. The air felt dense, thick, like it didn't want to move. Even my breath sounded louder than usual. I reached the middle of the yard and turned slowly in place, scanning every corner. Fence line, trees, garden beds, nothing stood out. The stillness pressed down, and I realized just how quiet it really was. No insects, no distant traffic, no wind, just silence. Then, for a brief moment, the security light flicked on again. But this time, it flashed only once and turned off. The air didn't shift. It didn't get warmer. It just stayed too still. A faint pressure seemed to hang around me. Not enough to knock me back, just enough to notice, like being underwater but still breathing. "Yeah. Okay," I murmured, stepping backward. I headed back toward the porch, but slowed when I felt something change again, subtle and hard to define. The yard didn't look different, but it felt like something had settled in that hadn't been there before. The faint crunch of gravel came from near the fence. I froze. Nothing followed the sound. The gravel settled. I stared toward the corner of the yard, waiting for another sign. The security light didn't come back on, but a faint pale glow brushed the grass for just a moment, low and muted, not bright enough to cast real shadows. It hovered almost imperceptibly, as if the ground itself had briefly lit up under invisible moonlight. Then it faded. My heart started beating faster now. I stepped backward again, not taking my eyes off the spot where the glow had appeared. The air held the same heavy stillness, no movement, no explanation. Just that unnatural quiet stretching longer than comfort allowed. I backed up onto the porch, then into the house, and closed the door behind me a little too quickly for someone trying to stay reasonable. Inside, the normal hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the wall clock made the silence outside even more obvious by contrast. I leaned against the door for a second, listening for anything that might prove the world had gone back to normal. Nothing came. Eventually, I forced myself to glance out through the kitchen window again. The yard sat in darkness. No light, no movement. Everything looked normal now, like the last 5 minutes hadn't happened at all. I stayed there a while, just watching, waiting for either the light to snap on again or the air to start moving naturally. Neither happened. By the time I finally turned off the kitchen light and walked down the hallway toward my bedroom, my nerves still felt stretched thin, like something unfinished hung in the quiet. Later that night, when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I swore I felt the same pressure settle for a second, like the room had grown denser without changing temperature. Then it disappeared. Outside, the yard stayed dark and motionless. No more flashing lights. No sounds. Just the same backyard I'd known for years, now holding a strange kind of stillness that never fully left my thoughts. The vibration rolled through the ground like something heavy moving far away, slow and steady, just strong enough that I felt it in the soles of my shoes. I stopped mid-step and frowned, trying to figure out if it was just a truck passing somewhere out of sight. But the road behind me was empty, and the nearest highway was miles off. I was walking along the edge of the old salt flats outside Blythe Crossing, a dry stretch of cracked earth that bordered the scrubby farmland. It was early evening, that hot dusk hour when the sky faded from pale orange to gray purple and the air still clung to your skin. No wind, no clouds, just heat hanging low and thick. My name's Owen Kessler, and I'd started taking these walks after my divorce, just to burn off restless energy. Nothing about the place was exciting, just open horizon, brittle weeds, and dusty ground that stretched forever. The vibration passed again, not violent, just a low, quiet shudder underfoot. I looked down at the earth, half expecting to see ripples in the cracked soil. It stayed solid, dry, and unmoving. Still, the subtle tremor lingered for another second, then faded. I waited. Nothing followed. Then, off in the distance, I noticed something odd along the horizon line. A small light drifted sideways, perfectly level, gliding from right to left, like a slow-moving star that had decided to ignore the rules. It wasn't bright, it didn't blink. It just hovered low enough that it looked like it belonged to the land instead of the sky. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. No vehicle moved across the fields out there. No tower lights sat low like that either. And whatever this was, it remained completely silent. The vibration touched my feet again, slightly stronger this time, and like a heavy ripple moving just beneath the surface. I shifted my stance, unsettled enough now to stop walking entirely. The light continued its horizontal path, perfectly smooth. No bounce, no wobble, no sound. "What are you?" I murmured. The air around me stayed still and warm. Not even the usual faint breeze brushed my arms. The glow slid another few yards across the horizon and then paused mid-track. It just stuck there, not rising, not falling. My heartbeat picked up, even though nothing objectively threatening had happened yet. It was more the wrongness of it, the sense that it wasn't meant to be there, and yet it clearly was. The vibration rolled through the ground a third time. Longer now. I felt it travel up through my legs, subtle enough that it almost felt imagined, but real enough that I couldn't ignore it. The glow resumed drifting. I watched it carefully, trying to determine if it was getting closer or farther. The distance remained impossible to judge, but the way it moved felt intentional, like something adjusting rather than simply floating. The sun slipped lower, bleeding out the last warm color of the evening, and the light remained unchanged. As I stared, another moment of stillness crept in. The usual hum of evening insects dulled. The faint rustle of dry grass softened to near silence. Then the glow shifted slightly upward and slid farther left, crossing behind the distant silhouette of a low ridge before reappearing again with the same dull brightness. No beam, no glare, just presence. Something about that bothered me more than if it had looked dramatic or obvious. It behaved too calmly, too controlled. The vibration hit again, just a small pulse, then faded. I waited for the earth to fully settle, listening. The light hovered once more and then drifted slowly off, vanishing behind the far edge of the horizon until it was gone completely. The sky returned to an even shade of dim gray. The ground beneath me stilled. And yet, the feeling didn't. I stood there longer than I'd meant to, eyes trained on the empty stretch where that light had last lingered. No new movement appeared. The silence slowly gave way to the usual distant buzz of evening sounds again. Still, a tightness lingered in my chest. I finally pulled my phone out to check the time. 8:57 p.m. Only a few minutes had passed, but the moment felt stretched, disconnected from normal flow. I glanced up again. No light, no horizon shift, just empty open land. Probably some weird tower light in the distance, I muttered, though I knew there weren't any towers that low. I turned and started walking back toward the gravel lot where I'd parked, keeping one eye on the sky without fully meaning to. Another vibration brushed my feet, faint but distinct. This time the light returned, further to the left now, smaller, but still drifting sideways in that same controlled line. My steps slowed again. The air grew heavy in that subtle way that made everything feel more alert, more aware. The glow advanced across the far line of land, like it was pacing something unseen beneath it. I watched until my eyes watered slightly from staring so intently. Then it faded again, just as smoothly as before. And though the ground stilled once more, the sense of being linked to whatever that light was didn't fade with it. I quickened my pace toward the car now, no longer interested in stretching the moment or pretending I wasn't unsettled. I reached the gravel lot and glanced one last time over my shoulder. The horizon sat calm and dark, no faint glow, no strange shiver under the earth. I drove home with the windows down, letting cooler air flow into the car as dusk deepened fully into night. Still, every stretch of open land I passed made my eyes instinctively search for that small drifting point of light. None appeared. When I parked in front of my house, the porch light glowed, warm and familiar. My neighbor's dog barked lazily from across the yard. Everything felt normal again, at least on the surface. Inside, I poured a glass of water and leaned against the kitchen counter, replaying the moment over and over in my head. That strange movement, the silent glide, the way the ground had stirred beneath me. Later, when I stepped back outside just to breathe in the cooler air, the night sky stayed quiet and empty. No glow along the horizon, no rippling underfoot. But even then, as the breeze brushed past my arms, I couldn't shake the sense that whatever had moved out there hadn't been random, and that somewhere beyond the line of darkness, something had simply chosen to pass through my field of view long enough to be noticed. The first time I noticed it, I thought it was just a trick of the light. I was sitting on a flat rock near the edge of Willowmere Lake, the quiet little spot about 20 minutes outside Fairhaven that no one really bothered with anymore. It was late afternoon, the sky overcast but bright enough to see everything clearly. A light breeze rolled across the water, pushing small ripples toward the shore, and the air smelled faintly like damp leaves and cold stone. Fall had just started to lean in, and the trees along the edge of the lake were beginning to lose their color. My name's Nolan Pierce, and I'd gone out there to kill time more than anything. Work had been rough all week, and I just wanted somewhere still enough to sit without hearing someone talk at me. The surface of the lake looked normal at first, dull gray water reflecting a soft blanket of clouds. Occasionally a leaf would drift by, or a fish would break the surface and vanish again. Then something moved beneath it. Not a splash, not a ripple. A dull reflection, like a shadow sliding under the water, shifted sideways just a few feet from where I was sitting. It wasn't dark enough to be a branch. It wasn't sharp the way a fish's body flashes in the sun. It was more like a blurred shape, moving slow and smooth, like something passing under frosted glass. I leaned forward slightly, narrowing my eyes. The shape faded almost immediately, melting back into the flat gray of the lake before I could fully focus on what it had been. I waited. Nothing else appeared right away. I told myself it had probably been a cloud reflection changing with the ripple pattern, something natural, something forgettable. But my eyes stayed fixed on the same patch of water. A minute passed, then two. Just when I'd started relaxing again, it came back. The reflection slid through the water again, this time a little farther out, moving horizontally, steady and calm. No splashing, no disturbance, just a shifting tone beneath the surface, like something passing between layers. My stomach tightened. "What is that?" I murmured, leaning closer to the edge. The dull shape wavered and disappeared once more. The water flattened out again, returning to its normal muted sheen. I stayed perfectly still, barely blinking, waiting for it to come back. The lake felt suddenly bigger, deeper. A faint sound of leaves crunching behind me made my shoulders tense. But when I glanced back, no one was there. Just the dirt path winding through the trees, empty and quiet. I looked back to the water. Still nothing. The breeze shifted slightly, brushing cold air across my skin. The surface of the lake rippled softly, reflecting the gray sky without disturbance. Just as I started to feel ridiculous for getting worked up over nothing, a longer stretch of shadow appeared beneath the surface, darker than before, passing slowly from left to right. It moved too evenly to be drifting debris, too smoothly to be a fish. It looked deliberate. I sat frozen, watching it glide under the water like something pacing just beneath where I could see. It didn't break the surface, it didn't form waves. It just passed, and then softly dissolved like the earlier ones. My heartbeat picked up, slow and loud in my ears. I crouched down closer, careful not to slip on the rock, scanning for any visible source. The bottom of the lake wasn't visible that close to shore. It just darkened quickly into murky depth. A chill crept up my arms. The air went strangely still, like even the wind had paused. Then another ripple began, but not from the surface. It felt like motion underneath, like a silent displacement, like a heavy presence shifting position. The dull reflection turned up one more time, closer now, around 15 feet out. It lingered slightly longer than before, then faded away into nothing. I exhaled slowly. "Okay, I'm done," I muttered. I picked up my bag and started backing away from the shoreline, eyes still locked on the water. Every step felt heavier than usual, like the ground had become less reliable. Behind me, the forest remained quiet. No bird calls, no insects, just the faint hum of the water brushing gently against rock. I turned once more, just to be sure I hadn't imagined it. The lake's surface looked calm and unremarkable. Then the water dimmed slightly in one narrow stretch, a faint path of shade that slid beneath the reflection of the clouds. It faded before I could pinpoint its shape. My chest tightened again. I stepped back farther until my boots hit dry dirt. Nothing else appeared. Still, I stayed there longer than I should have, staring at the same open water as if trying to catch whatever moved beneath it again. Eventually, the normal sounds of the place returned. Leaves shifting, a distant crow calling out, a faint rumble of a car far down the road. The tension eased just slightly. I finally turned away and walked back along the trail toward the parking area, but something about that lake didn't feel the same anymore. Halfway up the path, I heard a soft splash behind me. Not a big one, just a light disturbance. I froze, heart thudding again. The trees stayed still, no new movement. I turned slowly. The water surface now lay smooth and innocent again, no sign of whatever had slipped beneath it. I stared for a long moment, waiting for more. Nothing came. The trust I'd had in that quiet little lake felt cracked in a way I couldn't explain. The drive home passed uneventfully, but I kept picturing the way that dull reflection had moved, like something navigating a deeper world I had no access to. That night, when I lay in bed, I kept thinking of that slow glide under the surface, the way it never fully revealed itself and never stirred the water above it. Even now, when I pass by lakes and ponds, I catch myself watching just a little longer than before, waiting for that muted shadow to reappear, slipping silently beneath the surface and away before reality has time to understand it. The faint clicking pulled me out of sleep in the softest way, like something tapping rhythmically just outside the window. I opened my eyes and lay still, listening. The room was dark except for the pale digital glow of the alarm clock on my nightstand. 3:17 a.m. The clicking continued, slow and steady, like a quiet mechanical sound that didn't belong to any appliance in the house. My name's Rowan Ellerby, and I lived alone in a small cabin on the edge of Pine Hollow, about 15 minutes outside Larchmont. It was the kind of place people called peaceful during the day and too quiet at night. No street lights, no close neighbors, just trees, gravel, and wind most of the time. But this wasn't wind. The clicking had a pattern, soft, controlled, almost deliberate. I pushed the blankets aside and swung my feet onto the cold floorboards, keeping my movements slow so I didn't fully wake the house. The sound came from outside my bedroom window, which faced the tree line. I stepped closer and gently pulled the curtain back. A soft glow drifted between the branches, not bright enough to illuminate the ground, but clear enough to be seen. It moved sideways, sliding slowly behind the tree trunks like it knew exactly where to go. Not bobbing, not flickering, just gliding. The clicking stopped. I held my breath, staring into the dark. The glow slipped farther into the woods and then vanished behind the thickest cluster of trees, leaving the forest pitch black again. My heart beat slow and heavy in my chest. The night returned to silence. I stayed there for a full minute, waiting for the noise to resume or the light to return. Nothing happened. It was probably just some animal in a reflection, I muttered, even though I didn't believe it. I stepped back from the window and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to steady myself. The quiet pressed in again. I strained to hear anything else outside. A breeze. Leaves. Anything normal. Nothing. Eventually, I lay back down, telling myself I'd imagined most of it. I must have fallen asleep again because the next thing I knew, pale morning light filtered through the curtains. The first thing I did was check outside. No glow, no disturbance, just dew on leaves and the faint mist that always lingered around the base of the trees early in the morning. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the unsettled feeling. Every creak of the house, every distant rustle of branches made my attention snap toward the window. That night, I made a habit of locking every door, double-checking the latch on the windows, and turning on the porch light earlier than usual. I told myself it was just caution. Sleep came in shallow waves. Then, around the same hour, the clicking returned. It was softer this time, but clearer. A precise tick-tick-tick, not irregular like twigs snapping or leaves brushing wood. It sat just beyond the edge of the window like something patiently waiting. I didn't move right away. The sound shifted slightly, then paused. My pulse picked up. After a few seconds, it started again, lighter now, almost careful. I forced myself to slide out of bed and step over to the window, dread coiling tight in my stomach. I pulled the curtain back slowly. The soft glow was back, slightly brighter than the night before. It drifted along the outer edge of the tree line, lower now, closer to the ground. Still silent, still smooth, still wrong. Whatever created it never revealed itself. The clicking stopped as the glow moved, as if linked somehow. The light hovered briefly, just long enough for my chest to tighten, then slipped back into the woods, swallowed by shadow. Gone again. I stayed frozen at the window, barely breathing, eyes scanning the now empty darkness. Nothing followed. The rest of the night dragged on with no further noise, but I never truly slept again. Morning light eventually crawled in through the trees like a slow forgiveness that didn't quite erase the memory. Later that day, curiosity chipped away at fear. I walked along the edge of the woods behind the cabin, careful but needing to know if anything unusual remained. No broken branches, no tracks, no signs of anyone or anything, just untouched forest floor. That evening, clouds rolled in, hanging low and heavy, muting what little moonlight might have offered. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening, waiting. The clicking didn't come immediately. When it did, it came closer, not pressed against the glass, but close enough that the sound felt intimate, like something just beyond reach. This time, I opened the curtain faster than before. The glow was there again, only now it traced a slower path between the trees, almost observing. I stood there longer, heart in my throat, eyes locked on it as it drifted past the trunk of a pine and disappeared behind another. The clicking returned briefly, then faded. I expected fear to fully take over, but what I felt was more confusion, like being watched by something that refused to fully reveal itself, something content to hover just beyond understanding. The nights that followed remained quiet. No clicking, no glow. Just ordinary darkness and occasional animal sounds that felt normal again. Still, every time I lay down and closed my eyes, part of me waited for that faint mechanical sound to return. The subtle sliding light threading through the trees like it had its own quiet purpose. Weeks passed without incident, but the sense that something had briefly brushed against my reality didn't dissolve. It just lingered, faint and unresolved, like a memory I couldn't place but couldn't forget either. The porch light flickered twice and went out completely, leaving the front steps in shadow. I was standing just inside the screen door, one hand on the knob, watching it like maybe it would magically turn back on if I stared long enough. It didn't. The rest of the house was lit up behind me, but the yard suddenly felt darker than it should have. It was a cool, damp evening, one of those early spring nights where the ground still held moisture and the air smelled faintly like wet concrete and budding plants. A thin layer of fog clung low to the grass and drifted toward the street in slow patches. My name's Marissa Coleman, and I lived alone in a small, split level on the edge of a quiet neighborhood in Everett Hills. Nothing fancy, just a few blocks of nearly identical houses, trimmed lawns, and the occasional barking dog. The porch light had been working fine an hour earlier. I'd flipped it on out of habit before taking the trash out. Now it sat dead, and the bulb didn't even glow faintly. Great timing, I muttered. I stepped out onto the porch, the cool air immediately brushing against my arms. The motion sensor on the driveway light didn't trigger, which felt wrong. Usually even a breeze would set it off. I glanced up instinctively, checking the fixture above the door, then scanned the yard. That's when I noticed it. A soft, pale light hovered just above the roofline, slightly to the right of the chimney. Not bright, not flashing, just a gentle glow like something dim and steady floating in place. It wasn't a star, it sat too low and too close. It also didn't move. I froze, staring at it. The light held steady, suspended in a way that didn't make sense. It had no clear shape beyond a soft, rounded blur and no visible source. No beam, no reflection, just presence. I tried to rationalize it. A drone, maybe? A reflection? Some weird angle of a street lamp? But it stayed silent. No hum, no buzz, no mechanical noise at all. The air around me felt unnaturally cold now, or maybe I'd just gone tense without realizing it. "Hello?" I called out, feeling immediately ridiculous for saying anything at all. The light didn't respond. It lingered for what felt like 10 seconds, maybe more, and then slowly faded until the sky was empty again. Just dark roof shingles and a drifting veil of fog. My chest felt tight, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. I waited, eyes locked on the same patch of sky, expecting it to return. Nothing happened. The porch light remained dead. I stepped down off the porch, moving cautiously across the damp walkway, trying to inspect the fixture, as if that somehow explained what I'd just seen. I reached up and twisted the bulb slightly. It stayed dark. Behind me, the yard sat silent and still. No crickets, no distant traffic noise, just quiet. I glanced up again. Nothing. Only the faint outline of the roof and a heavy gray sky. I told myself it was probably a wiring issue and made my way back inside, locking the door. The normal hum of the refrigerator and soft tick of the living room clock should have settled me, but they didn't. I kept drifting toward the front windows, peeking through the blinds every few minutes, half expecting to see that glow return. It didn't. After a while, I forced myself to sit down, turned on the TV just for background noise, and tried to move on with the night. Around 10:30, I noticed something else. The hallway felt oddly dim, like shadows had shifted even though the lights hadn't changed. The porch light still refused to turn on, no matter how many times I flipped the switch. I finally gave up and went to bed, telling myself I'd deal with it in the morning. Sleep came in uneven waves. I kept waking to small sounds, subtle creaks, the soft groan of the house settling, things totally normal that suddenly felt louder. At one point, I heard a faint thump outside, like something brushing the siding. I lay still, listening. Silence returned. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me back under. When I woke the next morning, gray light filtered through the curtains. The porch light was still off. I made coffee and stepped outside just to check the yard. Everything looked normal, grass damp with dew, a faint mist lingering along the fence line. Not a single sign that anything unusual had hung over my roof the night before. The fixture itself looked fine. No cracks, no burnt smell, nothing out of place. I flipped the switch again. The light came on instantly. A warm yellow glow spread over the porch like it had never failed at all. I stared at it for a long moment. That evening, when dusk settled again and the fog crept back in, I sat by the window instead of on the porch, watching the sky with more attention than I ever had before. The porch light stayed on. Everything looked the way it should. Still, a strange tension sat in the back of my mind as the night deepened, like I was waiting for something I couldn't name. Around midnight, the light flickered once more. Just once. I watched as the world outside darkened again, my heart thudding quietly in my chest. My eyes drifted upward toward the roofline, scanning the sky for any hint of that pale presence. This time, nothing appeared. Just fog, shingles, and the blank quiet of the night. The light snapped back on after a few seconds and stayed steady. I didn't move. I kept staring through the glass, unwilling to look away, as if turning my back would make something unseen drift back into place above the house. But the sky remained empty, and even as normal sounds slowly returned, distant cars, a faint dog bark, the whisper of wind brushing leaves, the sense that something had briefly paused over my roof, watched for a moment, and then slipped away, never fully left the air. It started with that weird feeling in my chest, like someone was standing close behind me even though the sidewalk was empty. I was walking home from the late shift at O'Rourke's Pharmacy, taking the usual route through the older part of town where the streetlights were spaced too far apart and half of them flickered like they'd given up trying. It was close to midnight. Fog rolling in from the river a few blocks over, thick enough to blur the edges of everything without fully hiding it. My name's Declan Moore, and I'd made this walk 100 times before without thinking about it. Same cracked concrete, same leaning stop sign, same quiet stretch of houses that never seemed to sleep. But that night, every step felt watched. Not the casual kind of watched you get when someone's car slows down or a stranger walks by. This felt heavier, focused, like an awareness that followed just a little too closely to ignore. I glanced over my shoulder the first time and saw nothing, just the glow of a street lamp diffused through fog and the empty road curving back toward the intersection. I kept moving. The feeling didn't fade. It stayed, clinging to the space just behind my shoulder blades, tightening every time my mind tried to relax. My footsteps echoed faintly. The fog curled low around my ankles. Somewhere a dog barked once and went quiet again. I checked over my shoulder a second time. Still nothing. No one's there, I muttered under my breath, mostly to convince myself. The sense of being watched sharpened instead. My posture stiffened without me meaning to. My pace slowed as my eyes kept drifting upward, scanning the rooftops, the tree line, the gaps between houses. That's when I noticed it. A faint point of light sat behind the clouds above the street, barely visible through the haze. Not bright like a plane beacon, not twinkling like a distant star, just a small, pale dot resting behind the fog layer. It held still for a second, then shifted slightly. My stomach dropped. I slowed to a stop, eyes fixed on it. The light slid backward, almost like it noticed me noticing it, and then slipped behind a heavier stretch of cloud and vanished. The sky returned to its dull gray-orange glow from the city lights. I stood there longer than made sense, staring upward, waiting for it to reappear. Nothing. The fog drifted lazily, swallowing the empty space where the light had been. I released a breath I hadn't realized I held and started walking again, telling myself it was probably a plane at just the wrong angle, or some reflection bouncing off moisture in the air. Still, that sense of being watched didn't go away. If anything, it got sharper. I kept glancing up now, scanning for another glimpse of that faint dot. The sky stayed blank, yet the awareness lingered like eyes pressing in from every direction. My boots scuffed against gravel where the sidewalk broke near the old baseball field, and the feeling intensified again, enough that I actually stopped outright and turned around fully. Nothing behind me, just fog, lamplight, and quiet streets. "Okay," I whispered, feeling more unsettled by my own voice echoing back faintly than by the silence. I turned forward and continued, shoulders tight, jaw clenched. A block later, as I passed the empty lot where the old Miller place had burned down years ago, the air shifted. Not colder, not warmer, just heavier. The watched feeling pressed closer. I looked up instinctively. The faint light had returned. This time, it sat slightly to the right, barely visible through the fog, like a pinprick held in place behind a thin curtain. It didn't pulse or flash, it simply hovered, steady and aware. I slowed again, heart thudding. The light slipped sideways, smooth and controlled, before tucking itself behind another patch of cloud and fading from sight. The fog swallowed it whole. The silence around me thickened, no dogs, no wind, no passing cars, just my breathing, and that quiet, hovering sense of attention. I quickened my pace, shoes tapping faster now against the pavement as I tried to put distance between where I stood and whatever seemed to be watching from above. The streetlights ahead glowed dimmer through the mist, stretching like weak guides toward the neighborhood turn. Behind me, nothing followed that I could see. Yet that awareness stayed locked onto me, moving as I moved, staying just out of sight. My chest tightened. My hands felt clammy despite the cool air. When I reached the corner near Kinsley Drive, I dared another glance up. For a brief second, the light flickered into view again, just barely there, hovering behind the thicker band of clouds. Then gone. My pace turned practically into a brisk walk, every step louder now in my ears. "Just get home," I muttered. The final stretch toward my place closed in slowly, despite how fast I felt like I was moving. The moment I stepped onto my block, the feeling dulled slightly, like whatever had been watching no longer hovered directly overhead, but still lingered nearby. I glanced up again, more cautious than curious. The sky returned to normal. No glow, no faint pinprick, only the fog drifting silently over dark rooftops. The sense of eyes faded little by little as I reached my front steps, though tension still clung to my spine as I unlocked the door. Inside, the familiar smell of old wood and cleaning spray greeted me like relief. I shut and locked the door, resting my forehead briefly against the cool glass. The silence inside felt heavier than usual. I moved through the hallway, switching on lamps, letting warm light fill each room as if it could guard against the unease I couldn't explain. Eventually, I found myself standing by the living room window, curtain pulled back slightly as I scanned the sky outside. No light appeared, yet for a long while I didn't feel completely alone. Minutes passed, then more. Gradually, the normal sounds of the world filtered back in. A distant car hum, the slow tick of the kitchen clock, the pipes settling in the walls. The watched feeling ebbed to a faint whisper and then faded entirely. But even as everything returned to what looked like normal, every time the fog thickened near the clouds and I glanced upward, I half expected to see that pale point hovering again, slipping just out of sight like it never quite intended to be known. The sky ahead turned pale, almost milky, like someone had washed all the color out of it for a few seconds. I eased off the gas without really thinking, eyes fixed on the stretch of road where the light had changed. The beam from my headlights looked thinner now, weaker somehow, like the darkness had thickened instead of the lights actually dimming. I checked the dashboard. Everything looked normal. No warning lights, no flicker. My name's Cameron Halsey, and I'd been driving back from my brother's place in North Ridge, taking the slower back road that cut through farmland and empty wooded patches. It was after 11 p.m., the kind of quiet where even your own thoughts felt too loud. No streetlights, no houses, just a narrow ribbon of asphalt and tree silhouettes leaning in from both sides. The sky went back to normal almost immediately, just dark and low with heavy clouds, but the strange haze hung behind my eyes like I hadn't imagined it. "Okay," I muttered, tapping the steering wheel lightly. The headlights stayed on, but they didn't feel the same. The edges of the road seemed less defined. The world ahead swallowed the light quicker than it should have. I reached for the switch and flicked the brights on. The beam stretched a little farther, but not by much. I flicked them off again, uneasy. The road curved gently left and then straightened into a long, empty stretch. No other cars. Not even a distant set of taillights. The only sound was the steady hum of my tires and the faint rattle of loose gravel under the car. Another subtle shift washed over the landscape ahead, not as bright as before, but noticeable, like mist illuminated from behind. It didn't feel natural. It didn't behave like fog or moonlight. I slowed a bit more, heart thudding quietly under my ribs. The pale wash faded again, but the darkness remained heavier, pressing in closer around the vehicle. I glanced up at the rearview mirror, half expecting something to follow behind me. Nothing, just empty blackness and a faint reflection of my own eyes. "Get home," I whispered, easing forward again. A few minutes passed with nothing unusual, just the strangest sense that the night wasn't behaving normally, like the air had weight to it now. The radio crackled softly and cut out on its own, replaced by silence. I hadn't touched it. I frowned and twisted the knob. No sound. I adjusted the volume. Still nothing. The static that followed sounded thin, strained, like it was fighting through interference it couldn't explain. I shut it off completely and focused back on the road. Then the sky changed again. Not bright this time, just pale, like a wide, faint glow stitched itself into the clouds directly ahead. It didn't come from any clear source. It just existed, hovering and distant. The milky light held for a few seconds, long enough for my grip on the wheel to tighten. The road beneath me stayed dark, but everything above it now looked bleached, stripped of contrast. My eyes strained to interpret it. No lightning, no stars, no moon, just an eerie pale haze hanging where the horizon met the sky. Then it faded, and when it did, my headlights somehow seemed even weaker. The darkness felt thicker, almost tangible. I exhaled slowly, trying to regulate the sudden rush of adrenaline. "This isn't normal," I muttered. The road dipped slightly downhill, and the sense of isolation deepened. No farms, no barns, no signs of anything nearby. Just me and that unnerving silence. A faint pressure built behind my eyes, like something heavy resting over the entire night sky. I kept glancing forward, waiting for the glow to return. When it did, it wasn't as wide. This time it looked narrower, concentrated, almost purposeful. A patch of pale white floating above the road, perfectly still. My foot hovered uncertainly over the brake. The glow pulsed once, faintly, then slowly masked itself behind the clouds again as if sinking into them. My breath came shallow now. Each inhale felt colder. The headlights flickered once, just briefly, enough that my chest tightened again. "What is happening?" I murmured. A mile marker passed, barely visible. I recognized the number, but couldn't focus on it properly. The sky shifted a fourth time, brighter than before, nearly washing out the upper half of my windshield. It didn't hurt my eyes, but it felt wrong, like the world had tilted out of alignment. Then it vanished, leaving a deeper shadow in its place. The headlights now barely reached the opposing tree line. I slowed down to nearly half the speed limit without meaning to, every sense sharpened as if waiting for something else to emerge. The road ahead looked longer than it should have. Endless. Another flicker washed the sky, then darkness crushed back over the road. This time a faint hum seemed to vibrate through the air, subtle enough that I questioned whether or not it actually existed. I rolled the window down slightly, hoping fresh air might break the tension. Cold rushed in, sharp and real. No smell, no movement, just night. The hum remained for a moment longer, then faded. The sky returned to normal darkness like nothing had happened, but the sense of weight didn't lift. I kept driving, hands stiff on the wheel, eyes fixed straight ahead, not daring to look anywhere else. Minutes passed, then more. Gradually, the headlights began to feel normal again, stronger, more defined. The radio came back on quietly without me touching it, playing a low, distant country station that faded in like it had never left. The worst of the darkness loosened its grip. The sky stopped shifting. Still, I didn't relax. Not until the first set of distant town lights bled through the trees and the comfort of something familiar eased into view. When I finally pulled into my driveway and switched off the engine, the sudden silence felt heavier than the road itself. I sat there for a few minutes, staring at the dark hood of my car, replaying every strange moment in my head. The sky's pale glow, the dimming headlights, the heavy air. Nothing felt like a coincidence, but nothing left proof either. When I stepped out and looked up, the sky behaved normally. Just clouds drifting slowly across a quiet night, no milky wash, no strange pulsing light. Yet even as I locked the car and walked toward my front door, part of me kept waiting for the darkness to deepen again and the sky to bleach white one more time, just long enough to remind me that the road held something I still didn't understand. The thin beam of light touched down in the field behind my fence so quietly that at first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I'd been sitting in one of those plastic lawn chairs, the kind that always feels like it might crack under your weight, just staring out into the yard while my dog Baxter sniffed around the grass. It was a warm, sticky summer night in late July. The sky hazy with that faint orange glow from town lights reflecting off low clouds. Crickets were loud, the air smelled like cut weeds and warm dirt, and everything felt normal in that lazy, boring way. My name's Eliza Hartman, and I lived on a small property just outside Benton Grove. Nothing rural, but far enough that my backyard backed right up against an open field that belonged to some farmer named Len, who rarely visited his own land. I noticed the light when it brushed the ground just beyond the tall weeds near the edge of the field. It wasn't bright, not harsh, just a narrow column, pale and soft, stretching from somewhere above the clouds down to the grass. It didn't flicker or buzz, it just existed. I leaned forward slightly, holding my breath without realizing it. The beam stayed there, perfectly still, lighting up a small circular patch of field that didn't look scorched or disturbed. The grass within the glow moved gently in the breeze, like it did everywhere else. "Baxter, get over here," I murmured, eyes never leaving the spot. My dog padded over and sat beside me, ears slightly perked, watching the same direction. He didn't bark, didn't growl, just stared. The beam lingered for several seconds, long enough for my heartbeat to quicken, long enough for doubt to creep in. Then it vanished. No fade, no trailing glow, just gone. The field returned to shadow like nothing ever happened. I sat there frozen, listening to the crickets slowly fill the space again. Baxter let out a soft huff and lowered his head. "What was that?" I whispered. The air didn't feel different. No heat wave, no smell, no sound. I stood up, stepping closer to the fence line to better see the field, expecting something to remain. A patch of burnt grass, maybe. A mark. Anything. There was nothing. The field looked perfectly ordinary. The beam didn't come back. After a minute, I shook my head like I was snapping out of a daydream and told myself it had to be someone messing around with a spotlight or a drone. Still, there were no houses or roads close enough behind the field to make sense of that. I returned to the chair, but I couldn't relax. My eyes kept drifting toward the same patch of tall grass where the light had been. A breeze rolled through, gentle but cool enough to raise goosebumps along my arms. Baxter suddenly lifted his head again. His ears twitched. I followed his gaze. Nothing showed yet, just dark field and clouds. Then, faintly, another thin beam dropped down farther to the right this time, thinner than before, but just as steady. No noise, no movement. This one felt closer. My stomach tightened. The light hovered in place, motionless, illuminating only a small oval of grass that bent slightly beneath it as if affected by pressure rather than heat. I noticed something else now. The rest of the field looked darker than it should have. Not just due to night, it felt like the surrounding area refused to reflect any light at all. I stood again, heart thudding, stepping closer to the gate. The beam held steady. No flicker, no hum. It felt deliberate, and then it faded again, cleanly and instantly. Silence rushed back in like a held breath being released. I stared at the spot, waiting for anything else to happen. Nothing did. Baxter glanced up at me and whined softly, then sat back down. "Yeah," I muttered, more to him than anything. "You saw that too, right?" He licked his nose and stayed quiet. The rest of the evening passed in tension. Every chirp, every rustle of grass made me lift my head instantly. Around 10, a faint red light glowed briefly in the distance, high enough that it might have been a plane, but it moved too slowly and without sound before disappearing behind the clouds. When I stepped inside to grab a glass of water, the kitchen clock read 10:38 p.m. I stepped back out a minute later, still uneasy. No more beams appeared. But the yard didn't feel the same anymore. The familiarity of the space had shifted, like the boundary between normal and strange had thinned. Around 11, I finally went inside, locked the door, and pulled the curtains halfway closed. Still, I found myself peeking through them every few minutes, watching the black void of the field. Sleep didn't come easily. Sometime past midnight, I thought I saw a faint pale glow sweep across the backyard. When I looked properly, nothing stood there. By morning, everything appeared untouched. No marks, no dead grass, no sign of anything unusual. Still, when I let Baxter out a little after sunrise, I noticed something strange. The grass where the first beam had touched looked slightly flattened, not burned, just pressed down in a smooth, circular patch like someone had gently set something heavy there and lifted it away again. I crouched and ran my hand across it. The grass popped slowly back up. No scorch, no discoloration, just an impression. I stood there longer than I realized, staring at the empty field as sun filtered through the thin clouds. Nothing happened that morning. No lights, no sounds. But every time dusk rolled in after that, I found myself watching that same stretch of field a little more closely than I ever had before. Waiting, not knowing for what. The clouds had been drifting lazily across the sky until one patch just stopped. I was lying on my back on the dry grass behind my townhouse, hands folded over my stomach, using my hoodie as a makeshift pillow. It was one of those late summer afternoons where the heat hadn't fully broken yet, but the worst of it had passed. The air felt thick and warm, buzzing faintly with distant traffic and cicadas. The kind of quiet that usually made it easy to zone out. My name's Jordan Pruitt, and I'd lived in this cul-de-sac in Somerset Ridge for about 3 years. Normal place. Kids riding scooters, dogs barking at fences, lawn sprinklers clicking on and off like clockwork. I'd been watching the clouds drift slowly above, not really thinking much, just letting my eyes follow the gentle motion. Then I noticed one of them wasn't moving. It wasn't anything dramatic at first, just a pale gray patch, roughly oval-shaped, sitting slightly off-center above the neighboring rooftops. Everything else slid right past it, shifting shape and drifting west the way clouds normally do. But this one didn't budge. I squinted, tracking it for a full minute to make sure it wasn't my imagination. It stayed fixed in the same spot like it was pinned to the sky. My heartbeat ticked up slightly. "That's weird," I muttered. A faint wind tugged at the trees along the fences. Leaves rustled. A lawn chair tipped slightly against my leg. Normal stuff. But that patch of sky remained still. And then a dim light pulsed inside it. Not bright, not sharp. Just a soft, dull glow that flickered once from within the cloud mass, barely visible through its gray surface. I froze. The glow vanished almost immediately, leaving the cloud dull and blank again. I sat up, propping myself on my elbows, eyes never leaving that spot above. "What are you doing?" I whispered under my breath. The rest of the clouds continued their slow drift, reshaping as they passed, but that one stubborn section held its place like it refused to follow the same rules. Then the light pulsed again, slightly stronger this time. Still not enough to light anything around it, just enough to confirm that something inside that cloud was aware enough to announce itself. A neighbor's dog barked somewhere 2 yards over, but the sound felt distant. I got to my feet slowly, not sure why standing felt safer than lying down. The cloud patch remained unnaturally still. Another faint pulse flickered. Then darkness again. No thunder, no aircraft sound, no change in wind. I grabbed my phone from the ground and checked the time. 6:41 p.m. I considered recording it but hesitated. Something about the moment felt too delicate, like trying to capture it might make it vanish or somehow escalate. A breeze passed, warm and slow, brushing my arms. I looked away for 2 seconds, just to check if anyone else in the neighborhood noticed. No one stood outside. No voices. No movement. When I looked back up, the cloud still hadn't shifted. But now the glow inside it lingered a moment longer before fading, almost like the light hesitated. My stomach twisted into a tighter knot. I couldn't tell if fear or curiosity was driving me at that point. The sky around it began looking slightly darker, the contrast growing more noticeable, like that one patch controlled the brightness of everything near it. I took a slow step backward without realizing I'd started moving. The light flickered again, this time a short series of faint pulses, uneven and subtle, like something struggling to break through the cloud cover. Then went dark. The cloud held steady a few moments more, and finally it drifted. Not smoothly, not gradually like the others. It slid sideways just a hair, enough that I noticed it breaking its perfect stillness. The rest of the clouds seemed to relax again around it, flowing naturally. The light didn't appear again. A sensation of tension faded slightly in my chest, but my eyes remained glued to the sky. Minutes passed. The clouds slowly began to dissolve, its edges thinning until it became just another irregular shape, merging with the rest. Nothing happened after that. The world slipped back into its normal rhythm like it had never paused. Still, I didn't trust the calm. I stayed standing there, breathing slow, watching the sky like it might behave strangely again. Eventually, a neighbor walked past the fence with their phone to their ear, chatting casually. Somewhere, the faint whir of a lawnmower rose and fell. I forced myself to sit back down, though my muscles stayed tense. The rest of the evening passed without further disturbance, but the moment replayed itself over and over in my mind. Later, once dusk pushed the orange hue out of the sky and replaced it with cool purple-gray, I noticed another subtle change. The same section of sky from earlier looked faintly darker than everything else above it. Not a cloud this time, just a dim pocket of stillness. I leaned back against the patio chair and watched. It stayed motionless for almost 5 minutes. Then, for the briefest moment, a weak light flared inside it again. No flash, just presence. Then darkness reclaimed it. I didn't move, didn't speak. I just watched the sky and let the unease simmer in silence. It never returned that night. Over the next few days, I kept finding excuses to glance upward when I stepped outside. Most of the time, everything looked normal. But sometimes, in passing, my eyes would linger at that same section of sky just a second too long, waiting for something that might never come again. Nothing like it ever repeated exactly. The clouds flowed like clouds should. The wind felt normal. But every now and then, when the light hit just right and the sky looked a little too calm, I felt that same small prickle of awareness crawling up my spine, like the sky itself had briefly woken up, and then pretended nothing had happened. Every single bird on the power lines lifted off at the exact same second. I'd been walking along the narrow road that cut behind the old marina, the one lined with leaning utility poles and scraggly grass that never got trimmed right. It was just after 6 in the morning, the kind of gray-blue light where the world still looked half asleep. A light fog hung over the water and crept across the pavement in slow ribbons, and the air felt damp enough that my hoodie clung slightly to my shoulders. My name's Theo Marquez, and I'd gotten into the habit of taking early walks after moving to Harbor Point, a small coastal town that mostly felt forgotten by anything bigger than a grocery store chain. The only sounds usually came from trucks heading toward the docks or gulls fighting over scraps. That morning had been completely normal, quiet, calm, peaceful in a boring way, until the birds left. They'd been lined up along the wires, dozens of them, sitting so still it almost looked staged. Then, without warning, every one of them exploded into the air together, wings beating in a frantic blur before scattering in all directions. The sky above them emptied. I stopped mid-step, watching the last of them vanish into the fog. "What the hell?" I muttered. Before I could even process how strange that had been, a low hum slid over me from above. Not loud, not shaking, just a deep, steady tone that came from somewhere high overhead, like pressure moving through the air. It passed slowly, traveling from behind me toward the open water. I turned and craned my neck upward, eyes searching the pale sky. Nothing. No helicopter. No plane. No drone sound. Just that low, smooth vibration that faded as it moved farther away. The fog swallowed everything. The silence that followed felt heavier than it should have been. I stood there for a few moments, listening, hoping for another normal sound to return. Waves. Wind. Anything. Instead, the quiet stretched tight like the air was holding its breath. I finally resumed walking, slower now, scanning the sky every few seconds, even though it looked completely empty. The birds didn't come back to the wires. Another block down, I noticed something else. The water along the edge of the marina looked strangely still, almost glassy, even though the tide should have been coming in. No gentle movement. No soft slapping against the pylons, just a flat surface reflecting a pale morning sky. The fog thickened slightly as I moved, wrapping low around my shoes and drifting across the dock beams. A second hum passed overhead, this one softer but unmistakable. It lingered longer, like whatever produced it was moving slower this time. The tone didn't change, it didn't waver. Just that steady presence passing above the mist. I stopped again, turning in place, like trying to get any visual on the source. Still nothing. The wires overhead remained empty. The sky stayed blank. My chest tightened just a little. "Okay, this is weird," I whispered. I kept moving, hands shoved into my pockets now, trying to convince myself it was just early morning nerves doing their thing. Maybe industrial equipment starting up near the water. Maybe a plane too high to see. But it didn't feel like any plane I'd ever heard. Another strange detail crept in as I walked farther. The usual smell of salt water and diesel was gone. The air felt flat, neutral, like it had been stripped of character. Even my own breathing sounded duller. The hum returned again, this time faint and stretched, pulsing just enough that I felt it vibrate lightly through the ground beneath my shoes. I stopped entirely, heart rate ticking upward. The sound passed over slowly and then drifted away toward the ocean, leaving everything in its quiet wake once more. The fog shifted slightly, and then the birds came back, not all at once like before. Just a few at first, settling cautiously onto the wires, heads twitching, as if unsure whether it was safe. They stayed silent. I watched them for a moment, confused by my own racing thoughts, before continuing down the path toward the rocky end of the marina. By the time I reached the small lookout near the shoreline, the fog had thinned slightly, but the sky still carried that washed-out color that didn't belong to sun or storm. Something else caught my eye then. Out past the waterline, where the horizon should have softened into mist, a cluster of pale light hung faintly in the distance. Not bright enough to reflect on the surface, just barely noticeable, like a thin ghost of something behind the clouds. It held still for a few seconds. Then it drifted sideways. My breathing slowed. The light shifted again, almost deliberate, and then slowly dimmed into nothing. The hum followed shortly after, brief and low, like a final whisper sliding across the air. I stayed rooted there, staring at the empty horizon, trying to make sense of what I just witnessed. A fishing boat rolled lazily across the far distance minutes later, its normal engine noise cutting through the quiet and snapping some reality back into place. The birds began chirping again. The water shifted, resumed its gentle motion. Everything appeared normal again. But the moment refused to leave me. I kept walking until the sun finally began pushing through the fog, warming the edges of the morning and restoring familiar color to the landscape. Still, every time a faint sound rose on the breeze, my head lifted instinctively. I didn't relax fully until I turned down my own street and saw the familiar shape of my weather-worn house waiting at the end. Inside, normal life felt strangely louder. The clink of the coffee mug, the hum of the fridge, the familiar creak of wood beneath my feet. I sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the pale sky, replaying the birds taking off in perfect unison, that steady hum gliding overhead like something passing too quietly to understand. By mid-morning, everything outside behaved like it always had. Kids riding bikes, neighbors walking dogs, seagulls circling overhead. Yet the memory of that early hour clung heavy in my chest. The way the sky had fallen silent, the way the birds had fled without a single beat out of sync, the way the sound had followed without ever revealing what made it. And even now, when I walk that same path and the birds perch calmly along the wires, I catch myself pausing for a second longer than I need to, watching for any sign of them lifting all at once again. The air felt thicker the second I stepped onto the trail. It wasn't subtle either. I'd walked this same path behind Miller's Ridge 100 times before. It was my regular spot to clear my head after work. Packed dirt, scattered pine needles, a few loose rocks, nothing complicated. I could have walked it blindfolded. That afternoon, though, something felt off the moment my boots hit the first bend. The sky had that dull, overcast look that usually meant rain later, but it hadn't started yet. Just heavy gray clouds sitting low and stubborn. The trees looked normal. The birds sounded normal. Still, the air around me felt wrong, like it had weight. I slowed my pace without really meaning to. Every step took more effort than usual, like walking through humidity that shouldn't have been there in mid-October. My name's Trevor Hargrove. I lived about 10 minutes from the trail in a quiet edge-of-town neighborhood where most people waved but didn't really talk. I'd grown used to the peace. So the silence pressing in that day stood out immediately. The wind had dropped completely. Not a leaf moved. I continued forward, telling myself I was imagining things, but my shoulders stayed tense. The usual sounds faded into this weird, muffled calm that felt like being underwater without the pressure. About 50 yards ahead, just past the narrow section where the trees grew closer together, I saw it, a faint shimmer hanging between two trunks. It wasn't bright. It wasn't even clearly defined. Just a wavering patch of air that looked slightly distorted, like heat rising off asphalt. Except there was no heat. I stopped dead. My heart thudded harder than it should have for something so quiet. The shimmer pulsed gently, almost breathing. Not light, not dark, just a disturbed look in the air that didn't match anything else around me. I swallowed and took a thin step closer. Every instinct told me not to. The pressure in the air intensified slightly as I moved forward. Like the silence itself thickened. My breath sounded loud in my ears. "Hello?" I said quietly, even though I had no idea why I was speaking. No response. The shimmer wavered again, its edges blurring and reforming. For a second, I thought I saw a shape behind it, but it never fully came into view. Just the suggestion of something slightly darker than the space around it. Then the birds stopped, all at once. No chirping, no rustle, nothing. The silence pressed so hard it almost rang. I froze, eyes locked on the distortion, and then it faded. Not snapped away, not vanished, just slowly thinned out like mist until the air looked normal again. The weight in the atmosphere lifted subtly, but not completely. I stood there, breathing shallow, waiting for anything else to happen. Nothing did. The forest sounds returned in scattered pieces. A few leaves shifted. Somewhere farther down the ridge, a squirrel rustled through brush. But the uneasy feeling didn't go away. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone watching me, but the trail remained completely empty. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I checked it without breaking eye contact with the path ahead. No signal. That never happened out there. The coverage was usually fine. I slid it back inside my jacket and forced myself to keep walking, slower now, deliberate. The rest of the trail felt subtly warped, like I'd stepped into a place that looked the same but didn't behave the same. Sounds came a half-second late. My footsteps seemed quieter than normal. Even my breathing felt off. Another minute passed before I noticed it again, this time farther ahead through the trees. The shimmer had returned. Not in the same spot. It hovered slightly higher now, almost chest level, flickering faintly like air rippling in slow motion. It shifted barely side to side, as if adjusting its balance. I stopped again. The silence grew heavier. Behind the distortion, a vague shape seemed to lengthen and compress, but never clearly resolve. My stomach tightened. "What is this?" I whispered, more to myself than anything. The shimmer began to drift, gliding between branches without disturbing them, not bending twigs, not brushing leaves, just floating along the path like it knew where it was going. Towards me. My feet automatically stepped backward. The air cooled slightly as it approached, enough for my skin to prickle. The pressure in my ears deepened, a dull sensation like descending in an elevator. 5 feet away. 3. Then it stopped. The closest it ever got. I couldn't see through it properly, just endless vague motion, as if something existed just out of reach of clarity. A low hum pulsed once, soft enough that I wasn't sure if I heard it or felt it more through the ground. Then the shimmer collapsed inward and vanished. No fades, no afterglow, just gone. The sound of the forest rushed back in like a snapped cord. Wind returned, leaves moved. I stood there shaking, fully aware how alone I was. For a second I considered running, but my legs felt stiff and unsure. Instead, I turned around and headed back the way I'd come, not daring to look over my shoulder more than once. The hike back took longer than usual, though my watch told me barely 10 minutes passed. When the first houses came into view again, the air finally felt normal. Heavier tension stayed in my body long after I reached my porch. That night, laying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, replaying it all again without any clear sense of what I'd experienced. Sometime after midnight, my phone finally regained signal. 3 missed messages from my sister, none during the time I'd been walking. The next morning, I drove back to the trail, partly hoping to find something physical, some evidence that it hadn't all been in my head. The path looked the same as always. Dry leaves, packed dirt, quiet woods, no shimmering space, no quiet dead zone, just regular forest. I walked only a short distance that time before the pressure returned faintly at the base of my neck. I turned around not long after and headed home. Weeks passed. Nothing happened again. Still, even now, anytime I walk that trail, I notice the same stretch where the air felt wrong, and my pace automatically slows as if my body remembers something my mind still can't figure out. And sometimes, just for a split second, the space between the trees looks like it's breathing. My dashboard went completely black while I was cruising down Route 16, the stretch that cuts along the marshes outside Fairhaven. No warning, no flicker, just dead. The speedometer, radio, everything, gone. The only light left came from my headlights and the faint glow of the fog rolling in off the water. I eased my foot off the gas, heart picking up for no real reason other than how sudden it felt. It was late, somewhere past 10. The sky held that muddy gray color it takes on before a coastal storm. The air was damp and cool, the kind that makes your windshield film if you breathe too hard. My name's Elliot Marrow. I'd grown up around that area, knew every curve of that road. It was quiet at night, almost ridiculously quiet for how close it was to town. When the dashboard powered back on a second later, the radio sputtered to life with static, and I breathed out, half relieved. Then I saw the light. It hovered way back in my rearview mirror, well behind any curve or oncoming lane. Not bright like headlights, not yellow or white either, more like a pale, dull glow that didn't seem attached to anything. I checked my side mirrors, no cars, no motorcycles, no movement, just that steady point floating low above the road. My stomach tightened. Okay, I muttered to myself, even though I wasn't sure what I was acknowledging. I kept driving, eyes flicking back every few seconds. The light stayed perfectly distant, not closing in, not falling behind. Just there. The road curved slightly to the left, and I expected it to vanish behind the trees, but it didn't. It stayed visible, like it wasn't following the same rules as the rest of the world. A minute passed, then 2. The radio crackled again, low hum slipping through the speakers like a held note. I turned the volume knob down, then off, but the faint noise persisted for another second before cutting out. I tried to tell myself it was just some reflection or a distant tower light. But I'd driven this stretch so many times I could name every tower, every blinking marker. That light didn't blink, it pulsed faintly, almost slow enough to miss if you weren't watching closely. I glanced over my shoulder instead of relying on the mirror, twisting in my seat. The rear window showed nothing but fog curling behind me. When I faced forward again, the air inside the car felt oddly still, like I'd shut off the conditioner even though it was still running softly. The dashboard dimmed slightly. Not fully black this time, just dimmer like the power was hesitant. I swallowed and kept going. Another few miles down, the road straightened into a long stretch flanked by reed-filled wetlands. No streetlights, no houses. Just dark water and distant outlines of trees. The light shifted. It rose higher, lifting above roadway level, floating now like it had no connection to the ground at all. The humming returned, softer, deeper, and this time it felt like it vibrated faintly through the steering wheel. I didn't speed up, I didn't slow down, I just drove, trying to act normal, like I wasn't being quietly watched by something I couldn't explain. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. I glanced down. No signal. That didn't make sense either. Coverage on that road was usually decent. I turned it off and placed it face down, suddenly not wanting to see another screen fail. The light behind me grew slightly brighter, not harsh, not blinding, just more defined. I checked the mirror again and noticed something else. The fog around it didn't behave the same way. It stayed thin and motionless, not swirled or pushed like normal mist should be when something moved through it. The dashboard cut out again. This time it stayed dark longer. My heart hammered as I drove through nothing but my own headlights, hands tense on the wheel. The engine kept running, thankfully, but the silence felt heavier, like the whole car had dipped into a pocket where sound didn't travel the same. Then it came back on. Clock blinking, radio muted, speedometer glowing weakly, and the light was closer. Still distant, but noticeably nearer than before. A cold flush swept through me. I considered pulling over, but something about that idea sat wrong. Like stopping would somehow change the situation for the worse. So I kept moving. The humming grew faint again, synced loosely with the slow pulsing of the distant glow. My eyes burned from how focused I'd become. Every muscle felt tight, wired, waiting for something bigger to happen. But nothing did. No sudden approach, no dramatic shift, just that steady presence pacing me at a distance. When I finally reached the first cluster of lights near town's edge, the glow wavered slightly. It dimmed as if reacting to the streetlights and passing buildings. At the first intersection where the road dipped behind a line of tall pines, the light slipped behind the fog and disappeared. Not shooting off, not dropping, just gone. The hum faded with it, leaving only the low sound of my tires on wet pavement and the murmur of the engine. I realized only then how hard I'd been gripping the steering wheel. My hands ached when I loosened them. The rest of the drive home passed quietly. Everything functioned normally. The dashboard stayed lit. The radio behaved. Still, the sense of being followed clung to me until I pulled into my driveway. I sat inside the car for several minutes after cutting the engine, staring through the windshield at the dark shape of my house. Inside felt safer, but the silence didn't. I kept replaying that soft glow in the mirror, the way it hovered without meaning, without explanation. Later that night, when I checked my car from the porch, the road lay empty and still like nothing had ever happened. And yet, every time I drove that stretch again, I noticed how instinctively my eyes drifted toward the rearview mirror, scanning for even the faintest hint of pale light in the dark. A muffled thump hit the roof hard enough that the light fixture over my kitchen sink rattled. I froze mid-step, one hand still gripping my phone, listening for whatever came next. The house went back to its usual low hum. Fridge running, faint tick of the clock, nothing out of place. No second impact. No sound of anything sliding or rolling off, just silence. It was a little after midnight, and the storm clouds that had been hanging around all evening finally cleared enough to show a few dim stars. I'd stepped into the kitchen to grab water before bed when the sound came from directly above, near the back edge of the roof. My name's Caleb Rivas. I lived alone in a small rental on the outskirts of Maple Glen, a quiet wooded neighborhood with narrow streets and spaced out houses. Nothing dramatic ever happened there. The loudest thing most nights was a dog barking 2 streets over. Another few seconds passed, and the silence started to feel wrong. I set the phone down and walked to the back door, peering through the glass into the yard. The porch light cast a soft circle over the grass and the old oak near the fence line. Everything appeared normal. Still, the uneasy weight in my chest didn't lift. So I slipped on my sneakers and stepped outside. The air felt cool and dry, about that kind of crisp night air that settles in after rain. No wind, no insects buzzing, no rustling branches. My yard looked exactly as it always did. Then I looked up. A pale glow hung faintly above the roofline, just past the edge of the shingles. Dim, almost ghostly, but definitely there. It wasn't bright enough to flood the area, just enough to be noticeable against the dark sky. It hovered completely still for a second. Then it drifted upward. Not like something thrown. Not fast like a drone or helicopter, just a slow, deliberate glide, rising higher as if pulled gently by something beyond sight. I walked a few more steps into the yard without thinking, eyes locked on it. The glow tightened slightly, becoming more concentrated, then slipped further into the sky. As it climbed, the light grew fainter, almost blending with the gray-black clouds until it vanished completely. The night fell quiet again. No sound of engines, no rush of air, nothing. I stood there for another minute, waiting for some rational explanation to reveal itself, but it didn't. Finally, I muttered, "What the hell was that?" to nobody and headed back inside. I checked the roof from the upstairs window after, expecting maybe a fallen branch or loose shingle, but everything looked intact. No debris, no marks, no sign of anything landing or sliding. I went to bed with the feeling brushing lightly at the back of my mind, like someone standing just out of view. Sleep didn't come easily. Around 3 in the morning, I woke to a faint vibration, subtle enough that I almost dismissed it as part of a dream. The glass of water on my nightstand shivered slightly, ripples barely forming on the surface. The vibration faded after a few seconds. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening. Nothing followed. The next day, everything seemed normal again. Sunlight filled the yard, birds chirped, the neighborhood carried on quietly. I told myself it had probably been a raccoon or something heavy bumping against the house, but even that didn't fit right. Raccoons didn't float away, glowing. That evening, while taking out the trash, my neighbor Marissa from across the street waved at me. "You hear that weird noise last night?" she asked casually. I hesitated. "Yeah, something hit my roof." She nodded slowly. "Same. Thought a branch fell or something, but I couldn't see anything. Woke me up." I didn't tell her about the glow. Instead, I just said, "Probably just wind or something weird." She shrugged and went back inside. But later that night, as I stood at my bedroom window, I kept glancing toward the stretch of sky above my roof. Nothing happened for a while. Then around 11, there it was again. A faint smear of light appearing low above the tree line behind the house. It didn't move at first. Just hovered there, this pulsing so softly, I almost missed it. The air inside my room felt thick, and the usual nighttime sounds seemed muted. I cracked the window open slightly. A cool breeze slipped in, but the outside atmosphere felt strangely still, almost heavy. The glow slowly shifted sideways, careful and smooth, like it was following something invisible. As it moved, a low hum barely whispered through the air, not loud enough to be a sound so much as a sensation. My skin prickled. The light paused, then rose, gliding back toward where it had disappeared before. No speed, no urgency, just a calm drift skyward. I watched it the entire time until it vanished into the dark. The hum faded again, leaving only the night. I stood by that window long after, heart still pressing oddly against my chest, trying to understand what I kept seeing. Over the next few days, things continued subtly wrong. The porch light flickered once and went out, only lasting a few seconds before turning back on. My phone occasionally lost signal in the yard and regained it instantly without explanation. The air sometimes felt heavier near the back of the house, especially close to the oak tree. A few more nights passed, then, one evening, just after 10, another muffled impact hit the roof. Softer this time, but still noticeable. I was ready for it now. I stepped outside again. This time the faint glow didn't hesitate. It hovered a few feet above the roofline, slowly moving in a lazy arc as if observing something below. The air around it looked slightly distorted, rippling the same way heat warps distant pavement. I took 2 slow steps forward, careful. The hum returned, gentle, steady, not threatening, but deeply unsettling. The glow lifted higher, then drifted away into the dark sky once more, leaving nothing behind except the quiet. No marks, no damage, no proof. I survived every encounter, but the sense of being seen lingered long after the glow vanished. And even now, every night, when the yard falls silent and the wind goes still, I catch myself staring up toward the roofline, waiting for that soft light to return for reasons I still don't understand. A dark shape slid across the stars so smoothly that at first I thought my eyes were just tired. I'd been laying on the hood of my car in the middle of the High Mesa turnout, the spot a few miles outside of Arroyo Vista, where the light pollution finally drops off. It was late summer, still warm even after sunset, and the sky looked clear enough that the stars felt close. The air carried that dry, dusty smell you only get out there when the heat finally lets go. I'd come alone, which wasn't unusual for me. Stargazing was my way of shutting my brain off after a long week at the hardware store. No phones, no music, just quiet and the sky. When the shape first moved overhead, it wasn't dramatic. It didn't flash or sparkle. It simply erased the stars behind it for a few seconds, like someone dragging a shadow across the night. I lifted my head slowly. The shape glided from east to west, wide and soft-edged, darker than the space around it. Not a plane, not a helicopter. It made no sound at all. No whine, no rumble, nothing that fit anything I'd ever heard. I rolled off the hood and stood up, eyes tracking it. It kept moving at the same even speed, never wobbling, never changing rhythm. It didn't blink or show any lights, just absence where the stars should have been. My name's Dominic Salazar. I'd grown up in that area and knew the difference between normal aircraft and weird shadows passing over a sky full of stars. This thing didn't fit any of it. I leaned against the driver's side door and kept watching. The shape eventually slipped beyond the brighter band of stars and into the darker stretch toward the horizon where the desert met the hills, and then it was gone. No fade, no reveal, just empty sky again. I waited, half expecting something else to follow it, but the world stayed quiet. Crickets chirped faintly. A breeze brushed past, barely cool. I told myself I'd imagined it. Long day, restless head, nothing more. So I climbed back onto the hood and stared upward again. 10 minutes passed. Then the stars dimmed slightly, just for a heartbeat, like someone turned a dial down and back up again. Not the whole sky, just a wide patch almost directly overhead. I sat up slowly. The air felt heavier against my skin, like pressure building before a storm, except the forecast had been clear all night. My breathing sounded too loud in my ears. Then it happened again. That same smooth, silent movement passed across the sky, this time directly above me. Closer. The shape wasn't sharp enough to define, but it was definitely there. A broad shadow slipping over constellations I knew well enough to notice when they disappeared. I strained to see its outline, but the edges blurred like it didn't want to show itself fully. No sound, not even the faint rush of air. It glided past, slow and measured, like it had time. My heart started thudding harder. Not from panic, but pure confusion mixed with something colder underneath. I wasn't scared yet, just unsettled in a way that felt quiet and deep. When it cleared the stars again, the sky returned to normal, but the stillness lingered. A minute later, my phone buzzed beside me on the hood. I picked it up instinctively. No signal. That didn't make sense out there. Even in bad pockets, I usually had something. I slid it back down without checking again and kept staring upward. The desert fell into an odd quiet then. No crickets, no brush rustle. Even the faint sound of wind vanished. The sky looked the same, but it felt like I was being watched by something that had no reason to announce itself. Then, far above, a pale flicker appeared, faint and almost shy. It pulsed once, twice, then steadied. Not bright enough to illuminate anything, just a soft point that hung there unmoving. I didn't blink. The dark shape returned beneath it, moving even slower now, drifting in a line that didn't follow any normal path. It didn't cast shadows or block moonlight because there wasn't any strong moon that night. It only swallowed small islands of starlight as it went. My throat went dry. I whispered without thinking, "What are you?" No response. The flicker above dimmed slightly, then both the dark shape and the light slid toward the edge of the sky, gradually leaving my view like something backing out of a room. I waited. The stars filled in the gaps they'd left behind. The quiet began to feel too big. Eventually, the desert sounds crept back, one by one, cautious and ordinary, like nothing strange had passed through. I stood there for a long time after, just breathing, trying to line up what I saw with anything familiar. I couldn't. Eventually, I got into my car and drove home, the headlights carving narrow tunnels through the night road. The dashboard clock showed I'd been out there almost 40 minutes longer than I realized. When I pulled into my driveway, the sky above my house looked calm and empty. Over the next few nights, I returned to the same turnout, half out of curiosity and half because something in me needed to understand what I'd seen. The sky stayed normal every time, except once, just once, when a faint strip of darkness moved quietly overhead, barely noticeable, like a slow blink across the stars that left no mark behind. A sudden, almost physical urge hit me to look up, like someone had just called my name without making a sound. I stopped mid-step on Cedar Loop, the quiet stretch of road between my place and the corner store. It was just past dusk, the sky still holding faint traces of blue, but the streetlights had already clicked on. A humid haze hung in the air from the rain earlier, giving everything that soft, muted look. I tilted my head back. Above the line of split-level houses and power lines, a pale light hovered faintly, not bright enough to glow, but not dim enough to ignore. It looked like it was keeping pace with me, as if it had been drifting above my path the entire time without me noticing. The weirdest part wasn't the light itself. It was the way I knew to look. My name's Darren Holt. I lived on the south edge of Pine Brook, a quiet suburban area where nothing ever really happened. My biggest excitement most weeks was figuring out what was wrong with my lawn or listening to my neighbor's lab bark at squirrels. But that evening, standing on cracked pavement with my grocery bag biting into my wrist, I felt like the air around me had suddenly changed. The light slid forward at the same speed I'd been walking, staying slightly ahead, maybe 30 feet up in the air. It didn't pulse or flicker. It just stayed. I took a slow step forward. It moved too. A small knot tightened in my chest. I looked around instinctively, half expecting someone else to be pointing at the sky or recording it with their phone, but the street stood empty. No cars, no kids, no dog walkers, just me and that quiet glow. I started walking again, slower this time. The light drifted along my path like it was casually accompanying me. It didn't feel aggressive or fast, just present. After a few seconds, a strange stillness settled over the neighborhood. The usual sounds faded. No wind through leaves, no breeze. Even the distant hum of traffic felt muffled. I swallowed and tried to laugh it off. "Okay, that's new," I muttered, more to break the tension than out of humor. The light shifted slightly to the right, hovering above the center of the road now instead of the sidewalk. As it moved, it left the faintest shimmer in the air, like the atmosphere itself was bending around its path. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out quickly, hoping the screen wouldn't die like some bad movie trick. No signal. That also made no sense. Coverage was solid in that area. I slipped it back in and kept my eyes fixed upward. A soft pressure pressed against my ears like the beginning of a change in altitude. Not painful, just strange. I walked another half block. The glow matched every step. My breathing turned shallow without me realizing it. Then, without warning, the light slowed. I stopped. It stopped too. The neighborhood appeared normal. Quiet houses, the outline of Mr. Randall's old sedan parked crookedly in his driveway, a porch light flickering 2 doors down. Everything familiar, except the sky. The pale glow hovered almost directly overhead now. I leaned my head back more, craning my neck. The edges of it blurred softly, making it impossible to define the shape perfectly. It might have been round, it might have been elongated, the silhouette never fully formed. A faint hum rolled through the air, so low it felt more like vibration than sound. My heartbeat quickened. "All right," I whispered. "What is this?" No answer came. No sudden movement. No reaction. The light remained still for several seconds, hovering like it was observing something below. A thin warmth brushed lightly across my face, subtle but noticeable. Then it began drifting sideways, slow, calm, unconcerned. It moved toward the tree line that bordered the darker side of the street, slipping past the rooftops at an angle, the glow fading just slightly as it traveled. I turned in place, watching it carefully. As the glow pulled away, the pressure in the air eased. The faint hum thinned out, dissolving into silence. When the light finally slipped behind the low clouds hovering over the far rows of houses, the neighborhood sound returned all at once. A car passed 2 streets away. Someone's porch screen slammed shut. A dog barked. I stood there for another minute, pulse still elevated, trying to make some kind of sense of it. Nothing made sense. Eventually, I forced my legs to move again and walked the rest of the way home, glancing at the sky every few steps. Nothing followed me. Inside my house, everything felt normal again, yet the quiet settled heavy inside my chest like something unsaid. Later that night, while washing dishes, the same feeling crept back, that odd sensation of being gently watched. I glanced toward the back window. The yard sat dim and empty. No movement. No glow. But when I stepped closer to unload the dishwasher, I noticed the air beyond the glass flicker faintly once, then settle. Over the next few nights, similar things happened. Nothing as clear as that first evening, but small moments that didn't line up. The porch light shut off unexpectedly and turned back on minutes later without me touching the switch. My phone lost reception only in certain spots of the yard. The pressure in the air returned briefly every time I stood near the driveway. Once, while walking the same road again just before sunset, I felt that strong tug to look up. I lifted my head. Far above the rooftops, almost blending into the pale sky, a tiny glow slid quietly across the horizon before fading into the thinning clouds. It didn't follow me that time. It didn't stay. Just passed. And left me behind, wondering what part of the evening had drawn its attention in the first place. The signal dropped without any warning. 1 second my phone showed full bars, the next it read no service. I was standing at the edge of the public overlook near Blue Ridge Cutoff, a spot where the hills dipped low enough to see all the way across the valley. It was late afternoon, the kind of overcast day that never quite committed to rain, just heavy gray clouds hanging low and dull. A chill crept through the air even though it was still technically spring, and the breeze smelled faintly like damp soil and pine. My name's Julian Mercado, and I'd pulled over there just to stretch my legs after a long drive from work. No big reason. The road behind me stayed quiet, and down below the trees and brush swayed gently in the wind. I frowned at my screen and gave it a tap, thinking it was just lagging. Still nothing. I waited a few seconds, then switched airplane mode on and off. No change. The phone felt warm in my palm for no reason even though I hadn't been using it much at all. Great, I muttered. Normally, even in that area, I still had at least one bar, but now it stayed blank. I stepped closer to the railing, looking out across the hills while waiting for the signal to return. The clouds pressed low, almost flat in their stillness. The air felt oddly quiet, like the background noise of the world had been turned down just a little. I glanced left and right. No one else stood at the overlook. No cars pulled in. No distant chatter carried on the wind. A faint pressure hung in the air, not strong, just enough to make me aware of it. I checked my phone again. Still dead. I sighed and slid it into my pocket, deciding I'd just give it a minute. Sometimes the service came back on its own. Another minute passed. No change. I could still hear the whisper of wind through the tall grass and the faint creak of the metal railing as it shifted under my weight, but something about the overall quiet felt wrong in a way I couldn't put my finger on. Then the sky flickered. Not lightning, not a clear flash. More like someone turned up the brightness for half a second, a pale wash of light spreading across the low clouds before settling back into gray. It was subtle enough that I could have talked myself out of seeing it if it hadn't made my eyes widen instantly. "What was that?" I whispered. I tilted my head back, scanning the cloud cover for any sign of break or movement. The overcast remained thick and uniform, no shape or source for that brief light. My phone vibrated slightly in my pocket. I pulled it out quickly. Signal bars reappeared, full again like nothing had ever happened. Before I could even react, the sky flickered again, a wider pulse this time, more visible. The clouds brightened faintly, bathing the overlook in a pale, cold glow that lasted just a second longer than before, then vanished. Still no sound, no thunder, no crackle, no rumble, just light and then nothing. My mouth felt dry. I stepped away from the railing, heart tapping harder than made sense for something so quiet. I checked my phone screen instinctively. Everything worked. Messages loaded, notifications appeared that had been delayed just a few minutes before. It was like time itself had paused for a beat and then snapped back into place. The air felt thicker now, as if the light had left a faint residue behind it. I glanced toward the tree line below, half expecting something solid to be moving out there now that the sky had reacted. Nothing stood out, just hills folding into shadow and slow drifting greenery. A third flicker spread across the clouds, softer, more drawn out. It didn't illuminate the ground. It didn't cast shadows. It just shifted the tone of the sky for a moment, then disappeared again. My chest tightened. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but the idea hit me suddenly that I didn't want to be standing in open space if something else decided to happen next. I tucked my phone into my jacket and turned slowly toward my car. As I walked, the feeling of being watched crept in bit by bit. Not a sudden realization. Just that subtle sense that something beyond my normal sight had become aware of my presence. I forced myself not to look back immediately. Then I did anyway. The overlook stayed empty, the railing cold and worn, the sky dull and heavy, no extra light now. I reached my car and opened the door, glancing up one more time before getting inside. The clouds remained motionless. The dull gray horizon didn't shift. I slid into the driver's seat and shut the door, sealing myself into something familiar and contained. The faint hum of the engine starting felt more comforting than I expected. Still, I didn't drive off right away. Another flicker brushed the sky, even fainter this time, like the pale memory of the last two pulses. And then silence settled back in. I put the car in reverse. Halfway through pulling back, my phone buzzed against my thigh. A text from my friend Naomi. "You back yet? Signal cut out when I tried calling." I stared at the message longer than necessary. "Just stopped a second," I typed. "Weird service out here." No more flickers followed as I eased onto the road. The drive home stayed quiet, the world outwardly normal again. Trees blurred past, the road stretched in its usual winding line. The faint vibration of tires against pavement grounded me with every mile. Still, every time the clouds seemed to brighten just slightly from passing sunlight or reflective glare, my spine stiffened. By the time I reached town, the sky had cleared enough that bits of pale blue peeked through the upper layers. Life continued around me like nothing had happened. But the subtle break in the sky lingered in my thoughts, lodged there without explanation. When I finally parked outside my apartment and stepped out, the phone worked normally again. Bars full, notifications lining up as if nothing had interrupted them at all. I glanced upward one more time without really thinking about it. The sky remained its usual muted gray, drifting slowly, no sign of that pale flash anywhere. Still, the memory of that quiet flicker stayed with me. The way it arrived and vanished with no warning, like a moment shared between me and something that never needed to explain itself. The stars smeared across the sky like someone wiped a thumb through them. It happened mid-step, right as my shoe scuffed against a bit of loose gravel on the sidewalk. 1 second, the night looked normal, clear and sharp, quiet suburban stretch under a sky full of tiny, steady points. The next, everything above me stretched and blurred, like the whole roof of the world had been dragged sideways. I stopped walking without meaning to. My name's Marcus Lavoie, and I'd taken that same late-night route 100 times when I couldn't sleep. Just a slow loop around the neighborhood, past the closed coffee shop, the old playground, and the row of ranch-style houses that all looked identical in the dark. It was just after midnight, cool but not cold, the air dry and calm. The streetlights stayed crisp. The houses stayed crisp. But the sky looked wrong. The stars weren't gone, they were distorted. Almost smeared into thin streaks that slanted diagonally, like the world had tilted slightly but forgot to tell the rest of reality. I blinked hard and rubbed my eyes, thinking I just spaced out too long. When I looked up again, the blur was still there. No headache, no dizziness, just the sky behaving like it wasn't sure what shape it wanted to be. "What the hell?" I whispered. The blur slowly relaxed, the stars knitting back into their normal points as if someone carefully corrected the image. Within a few seconds, everything looked fine again. Almost too fine. I stood there staring upward, waiting for it to happen again. Nothing changed. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and forced myself to keep walking, pretending it hadn't rattled me more than it should have. A block later, another strange moment hit. The air went quiet in a way that didn't quite make sense. Not full silence, just dulled, like listening through cotton. I slowed and turned my head, scanning the street. No cars, no barking dogs, no passing wind through the trees, just the faint hum of a distant transformer and my own steps. I kept moving, trying not to let my mind spiral, but my eyes kept drifting back up to the sky. It looked normal now. Too normal. As I rounded the corner toward Oak Ridge Lane, the streetlight ahead flickered slightly, just once, and then steadied. I didn't remember it ever doing that before. My pulse picked up. I checked my phone quickly. 12:18 a.m. Everything else worked. No missing signal. No alerts. I put it back in my pocket and kept walking. Another few steps, then I felt it again. That subtle pressure, like the air had thickened slightly. And above me, the stars blurred. This time it lasted longer. The sky warped gently, not violently, just enough that every point of light smeared into thin ghostly trails. The clouds that drifted across the edges stretched in strange shapes, as if moving through slow liquid. I froze in place. My hand tightened around my phone instinctively, but I didn't lift it to record anything. The thought barely crossed my mind. I just watched. The blurred stars didn't pulse, they didn't flicker, they just stayed wrong for several seconds. Then slowly, like a lens turning back into focus, everything snapped back into crisp alignment. The sky returned to normal. The sidewalk beneath my feet remained solid and unchanged. The houses didn't look any different, but I didn't move right away. My breathing felt shallow, uneven. "All good," I murmured, trying to convince myself. "Just tired." But the strange stillness lingered. I glanced behind me. Empty street. The soft glow from porch lights and the orange wash of street lamps created long shadows that stretched across driveways. Every normal detail felt slightly too sharp now, as if my senses had adjusted to something new and didn't know how to go back. Then the wind picked up again, rustling the leaves on the trees, and the neighborhood slowly returned to its usual nighttime rhythm. I kept walking, but I changed direction, heading back toward my place sooner than planned. Another block passed with no incident, and I started to feel almost foolish, like I'd imagined the whole thing. Just as I reached the intersection near my apartment, the stars smeared for a third time. This time they shifted sideways, like the entire sky slid a fraction to the left before settling back. My stomach dropped. I stopped dead in the middle of the crosswalk, barely aware of where my feet were anymore. The blur held for a good 5 seconds, long enough for me to fully register it wasn't my eyes, long enough for panic to flicker at the edges of my control. Then it cleared, perfect again. I swallowed, suddenly very aware of how alone I was out there. A distant car engine droned somewhere off to the east, but nothing close enough to distract me completely. I forced my legs to move again, faster now, my shoulders slightly hunched as if I could physically outrun whatever this was. The rest of the walk stayed uneventful, but the sense of being watched crept in bit by bit, like something unseen knew I'd noticed, knew I'd been looking up. When I finally reached my building and unlocked the door, stepping into the dull, artificial glow of the hallway felt unreal compared to the strange weight of the night outside. Inside my apartment, everything was familiar. The smell of my laundry detergent, the quiet tick of the wall clock, the faint hum of the fridge. I set my keys down, but didn't turn on the main lights right away. I walked over to the window instead. Outside, the stars looked sharp and normal again. No smearing, no distortion, just distant quiet points scattered against a dark sky. Still, I didn't trust it now. I stood there for a long minute, watching, waiting for the sky to betray itself again. It didn't. Later, lying in bed, I replayed those moments in my head, trying to connect them to anything logical. Stress, eye strain, something psychological. But even then, when I closed my eyes, I could still see that warped stretch of stars, like a paused frame of something that had no reason to exist. And for a brief second, just before I drifted off, I felt the air shift slightly around the room, subtle and quiet, like the night still wasn't quite done, reminding me it could move however it wanted. The first thing I noticed was how still the clouds looked. I'd been walking the old access trail behind Pine Knot Ridge, the one that ran along the tree line before dropping down toward the quarry pond. It was late, close to 10, and the air held that damp chill that settles in after a light rain. Mist hung low over the ground, and the sky was thick with dark clouds that barely moved. I only went out there to clear my head after a long shift. Nothing exciting, that just the familiar sound of gravel under my boots and wet pine needles cracking softly. My name's Riley Marquez, and I'd lived in this town long enough to trust what normal looked like out here. That night didn't feel normal, but I couldn't explain why at first. I was halfway down the bend where the trail opens up just enough to see the sky when I instinctively looked up. Right above the clouds, or maybe just under them, there was a shape. Not a bird, not a plane, not anything with clear edges, just a darker section against the already dark clouds, like a shadow that didn't belong to anything. It was too still to be drifting, too solid to be smoke. It sat there, suspended, refusing to shift even as the rest of the sky moved faintly around it. I slowed and then stopped, my breath shallow without meaning to. It didn't have lights, no blinking, no sound drifted down from it. The woods around me stayed quiet except for the faint hum of insects and the damp smell of forest floor. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I ignored it, eyes locked on the shape. It looked flat, but not shallow, like it was projecting depth without enough contrast to truly define it, almost like a void pressed into the sky. I stepped forward once, cautiously, gravel crunching underfoot. The shape didn't react. It just stayed. A slow unease crept up the back of my neck. Not panic, not shock. Just the sense that something was out of place, and I wasn't meant to have noticed it. The air felt heavier. Even the mist below thinned, like the space around it held a different texture. "Okay," I whispered, more to break the silence than anything else. The shape remained. I watched for a good 30 seconds, maybe longer, time stretching strangely thin. Not a single movement came from it. No wobble, no drift, nothing aerodynamic about it. Then, almost subtly, the edges began to soften. The darkness loosened, as if the shape was thinning into the surrounding clouds instead of moving away. Not dissolving fast, just gradually losing definition. The contrast between it and the sky reduced, softening the corners until it looked more like uneven fog. My heartbeat quickened in a delayed sort of way. The shape didn't float off, it didn't shoot away, it simply faded into the night, blending back into the same dull cloud cover like it had never been there. And then it was gone. I stayed standing in the same spot, staring at the stretch of sky where it had been, waiting for anything else to happen. Nothing did. The wind rustled treetops faintly. Leaves shifted on the ground. The trail looked the same it always had. But a hollow quiet hung over everything for an extra moment, as if the forest itself had held its breath too. I swallowed and checked my phone, finally. A missed call from my coworker Isa asking about tomorrow's schedule. Normal. Grounding. I slipped the phone back away and forced my legs to move again, though my pace stayed slower than before. Every few steps I looked back up, half expecting the shape to return or shift somewhere else. It didn't. The trail opened a bit more down the slope, and the mist thickened again, climbing up around my knees. My own footsteps sounded louder in my ears than they should have. Another strange moment came when the ambient noise of the woods dropped too low. No wind, no insects, just silence. It pressed against my ears, reminding me of how isolated I was out there. I paused again and listened. The quiet lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then, like a switch flipping, the night returned to normal. I exhaled slowly, realizing I had been holding my breath without noticing. Nothing else appeared in the sky. Still, the idea of there being something capable of sitting that still, that quietly, unsettled me more than if it had darted away. I turned back toward the trailhead, not ready to go deeper into the trees. As I walked, a flashlight beam flicked through the darkness ahead. "Riley?" a familiar voice called. "Yeah," I answered quickly. It was Devin, who lived a few houses down from mine. He'd probably been doing his usual late loot with his dog. "You good?" he asked, squinting past me at the tree line. "Yeah," I said. "Just saw something weird in the sky." He followed my gaze upward. Like what? Dark shape, didn't move, then kind of just went away. He frowned. Plane? It didn't look like one. Probably the clouds, he shrugged. They mess with depth real bad at night. Yeah, probably. But even as I said it, I knew the explanation didn't quite fit. He wished me a good night and continued past, dog trotting beside him, past tail wagging like the world was fully normal. I watched till his flashlight disappeared down the trail before heading back myself. The rest of the walk passed without incident. No more strange shadows, no silence drops, no odd movements above the treetops. When I reached the parking area and got into my car, the interior felt strangely safe in contrast. The hum of the engine grounding, the dashboard lights familiar. I glanced up through the windshield one last time before pulling out. Clouds. Just clouds. No void. No shape. The drive back home took 10 minutes, streets nearly empty, wet pavement reflecting dull orange streetlights. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I felt mostly like myself again, even if that strange knot of confusion still lingered under the surface. Inside, my cat Luna meowed lazily from the couch and stretched, completely unconcerned by anything I'd just seen. I kicked off my boots and sat there for a moment, listening to the soft ticking of the wall clock. Everything was normal, almost too normal. I glanced toward the window again as if it might offer something else, but the sky looked calm and familiar now. Still, when I finally crawled into bed, the memory of that impossible stillness stayed with me. That quiet, dark silhouette pressed against the night, dissolving as if it had never needed to justify its presence in the first place. The light didn't behave like anything I'd ever seen on that stretch of road. I was driving east on County Route 17, the road that cuts straight through miles of flat farmland just outside of Glenora. It was early evening, that soft, dusty hour right before the sun fully disappeared, and the sky had that washed-out orange look that made every field seem endless. The air felt warm, even with the windows cracked, and dry wind carried the faint smell of cut hay across the asphalt. I'd taken that road 1,000 times. I knew every curve, every broken reflector, every stretch where the corn leaned too close to the shoulder. There wasn't supposed to be anything new out there. No buildings, no streetlights, no reason for anything to glow. That's why the steady light hovering above the crops made no sense. At first, I thought it might be a distant tractor or some farmer using a lantern. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't attached to anything. No poles, no vehicle, just a pale white glow floating maybe 4 or 5 feet above the corn rows, moving slowly alongside the field as if pacing my car. It didn't flicker, it didn't sway, it didn't cast any visible beam onto the plants below it. It just existed. My name's Jared Malon, and I'd spent most of my life around rural roads and quiet nights. I knew what headlights looked like from weird angles. I knew reflections, I knew fog tricks. This wasn't any of that. I slowed down without meaning to, eyes fixed on the strange light. It glided smoothly sideways, parallel to the road, completely silent. No buzzing, no mechanical sound, no hum. The corn under it didn't glow brighter. The shadows didn't shift. It wasn't illuminating anything at all. I rolled the window down further, leaning slightly toward the passenger side to get a better look. Warm air rushed over my forearm, but the light stayed steady, just drifting. "What are you?" I said under my breath. The radio played faint through the speakers, some talk show I barely paid attention to, but the moment felt isolated, like the rest of the world had lowered its volume. A pickup truck passed in the opposite direction, headlights washing across my windshield. For a second, the light disappeared behind that glare. Then it came back, still floating, still moving, perfectly calm. My chest tightened with a quiet kind of unease that didn't spike into panic, but made me painfully aware that something wasn't right. I tapped my brake and slowed further, matching its pace. The light didn't react, didn't drift closer or farther, just kept sliding through the air at a precise distance from the crops, like following an invisible track. I glanced around, trying to spot any wires, structures, or poles that might connect to it. There was nothing but open fields in the fading sky. The sun dropped lower, brushing the horizon in faint gold. The light didn't change. I watched it for what felt like a full minute, though time moved strangely thin in that moment. Then, without warning or build-up, it slid slightly upward, angled just a bit, and vanished. Not faded, vanished. 1 second it was there. The next, nothing. The space it occupied returned to the dull green of the crops and the low light of evening, as if the air had never held anything at all. I felt my hands tighten on the wheel. Okay, I muttered. Okay, no. I slowed almost to a stop, eyes scanning the field where it had hovered. I half expected it to reappear or pop up behind a row farther down, but the field stayed empty. Wind brushed through the corn, rustling leaves softly. The normal quiet of farmland returned. Still, the sense of something lingering didn't fade. I started driving again, faster now. The rest of the road felt stretched out, like my mind refused to go back into normal mode. Every shadow between the rows felt heavier, like it might move again. A mile or so down, I glanced back in my rearview mirror. Nothing, just dust, distant sky, and empty road. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it had been a reflection from the angle of the sun. Maybe a drone. Maybe something small and weird that just happened to look wrong. But the way it hadn't cast any light bothered me. Everything that glows lights something else. This thing didn't touch the world around it at all. When I finally reached the outskirts of town, the usual sight of streetlights and houses eased some of the tension in my shoulders. I passed the old feed store and the gas station where I sometimes stopped for coffee, pretending everything felt normal again. Still, every now and then I caught myself checking the edge of the fields as I drove through, just to see if that same pale glow would slide back into view. It didn't. By the time I parked in my driveway, the sky had deepened into blue-gray. Crickets had started up. A soft breeze passed through the trees. I sat there a moment with the engine off, listening to the quiet tick of cooling metal. "You saw something weird," I whispered, mostly to myself. Inside, the house felt warm and steady, familiar. My dog, Palmer, greeted me at the door like always, tail wagging lazily. The normalness of everything grounded me enough to stop replaying that floating light for a minute. After dinner, though, when the sky fully darkened and the land returned to shadow, curiosity tugged again. I stepped out onto the porch and looked toward the same direction of farmland, trying to spot anything out of place. The fields lay dark and calm. No light, no movement, just a wide stretch of quiet, breathing earth. I stood there longer than necessary, letting the night sounds soak in, trying to convince myself the moment had passed. But somewhere deep down, a part of me stayed alert, like the night itself had shown me a side of it I wasn't supposed to fully understand. When I finally went inside and shut the door, the sense followed faintly behind me, invisible and unanswered, like a soft echo left suspended over the land I knew too well. The hum slid into my sleep like it had always been there. I opened my eyes slowly, not fully awake yet, just aware of this low, steady sound coming through the open crack of my bedroom window. It wasn't loud, it wasn't sharp, it felt almost like pressure more than noise, like something vibrating far away across the flat land. My phone on the nightstand glowed faintly. 4:36 a.m. Outside, the horizon past the cornfields lit up pale for a few seconds. A soft white glow bleeding up and then fading again. No flash, no thunder, just a quiet bloom of light and then nothing. I pushed myself upright in bed, heart beating a little faster than normal. The hum continued. I lived just outside a town called Millbrook, the kind of place where everyone knows who owns which dog. My name's Trevor Haynes, and my house sits right at the edge of open farmland. Normally, that early morning hour is dead silent. No cars, no voices. Just wind and the occasional coyote cry. That night felt different. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and walked toward the window, pulling the thin curtain back just enough to peer through. The sky was still dark, stars barely visible behind low-hanging clouds. The fields beyond my backyard stretched flat and empty. The horizon stayed black now, like the glow had never happened. The hum persisted. It wasn't coming from inside. No appliances, no fan. Nothing was running. I cracked the window wider, letting cold night air brush across my face. The sound grew slightly clearer. Still faint, still steady, but definitely there, like something broad and distant humming through the ground itself. I stood there listening, unsure whether to feel stupid or concerned. Another pale glow crept along the horizon line, slow and soft, similar to the first. It hovered for a few seconds, then faded again into the dark. No sound change. No wind. My chest tightened slightly. I stepped back from the window and glanced around the room, as if something inside might suddenly explain this. Nothing moved. Shadows sat where they should. The house creaked normally. The hum carried on. I pulled on a hoodie and slipped my feet into boots without turning on any lights. For reasons I couldn't fully explain, I wanted to see it more clearly. Outside, the night air felt damp and cool against my skin. A faint mist clung low over the grass. Everything smelled like wet earth and cold air. The hum filled the open space more noticeably now. Not louder, just impossible to ignore. I walked slowly toward the back fence, eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the fields. The land stretched wider there, uninterrupted by buildings. Another glow rolled over the far end of the world. Pale, wide, and oddly calm. It looked like dawn trying to start, but giving up halfway through. I swallowed and kept staring. The glow faded after a few seconds, the sky returning to its usual blackness. The hum never wavered. I felt strangely small, standing alone in the middle of my yard at a time when the rest of the world slept. "Okay, what is this?" I muttered. No response. The sound drifted across the open space, low and smooth, like air moving through something massive out of view. I walked a little farther, just to the edge of where the tall grass met the fence. The night around me stayed perfectly still. No crickets, no birds. Even the usual rustle of leaves felt muted. Then the horizon blossomed white again, brighter this time, still not harsh, just more present. The glow pulsed faintly, slow and deliberate. It didn't race across the sky, it didn't flicker. It just hovered low, as if resting against something far away I couldn't see. The hum deepened, almost imperceptibly, but enough that the change made my spine tighten. I stepped back a pace, unsure if that made more sense than standing still. My eyes stayed locked on the light as it slowly faded for the third time. The sky darkened. The fields returned to shadow. The hum softened slightly, but remained. From the corner of my eye, I noticed a faint shimmer moving just above the crop line, far off in the distance. Not a solid shape, just a slight distortion, like air bending. I squinted, trying to focus. The shimmer drifted once, then twice, then stopped. Then it vanished. I felt a chill run through me that had nothing to do with the night air. I took a slow step backward, boots crunching softly against the damp soil. The hum slowly diminished as if moving further away, though the fields never showed movement. Silence crept back gradually. Within seconds, the night returned to its normal stillness, broken only by wind brushing the grass. I stood frozen where I was, staring into the darkness that had just held something undeniably strange. Nothing returned. The horizon remained quiet. No more glow, no more sound. I waited another minute, then another, until my breath visibly puffed in the cool air. Slowly, reluctantly, I walked back toward the house. The porch light flicked on when I stepped close, casting familiar yellow over the steps. The normal hum of my refrigerator through the wall grounded me again, pulling me back into the ordinary. Inside, everything felt the way it always had. Same dim hallway, same quiet ticking clock on the wall. Still, the memory of those few seconds clung to me. I stayed awake the rest of the night, lying on top of the covers, staring at the ceiling, listening for the hum to return. It didn't. Morning light crept in, pale and normal through the curtains. Birds resumed their usual chatter. A tractor somewhere down the road kicked to life as it always did. The fields looked the same, the horizon ordinary. Later that afternoon, I asked my neighbor Clara if she'd heard anything strange overnight. She shook her head. Slept like a rock. I didn't push it further. That evening, when the sun started dropping and shadows stretched long over the land, I found myself glancing toward the same spot on the horizon more than I realized. Nothing appeared. The sky stayed calm. But that night, just before sleep took me again, I caught the faintest vibration through the window frame for half a second, like a whisper of the same hum, distant and gentle. Then it disappeared, and the darkness settled back around the house like it always had, quiet and familiar, as if the wide open land simply chose not to speak again. I noticed the star wasn't moving like the others while I was lying on the hood of my car trying to cool off. The day had been brutal, one of those dry Nevada afternoons that felt like the air itself was made of dust. By the time I reached the gravel pullout along Route 50, the heat finally started bleeding away, leaving the kind of cool that made your skin feel tight and awake. The road was empty. No cars for miles, just sagebrush, open land, and a wide sky that always felt too big to fully take in. My name's Everett Rowe, and I'd stopped there more out of habit than intention. Used to do it when I got overwhelmed. Just pull over, stare up for a bit, let my brain slow down. That night felt perfect for it. No clouds, no moon, just a clean black sky filled with points of light. I lay back with my arms folded under my head and let my eyes adjust. The stars sharpened slowly, the longer I stared. The silence felt deep but comfortable, broken only by the faint ticking of my car cooling down and an occasional dry gust pushing through the brush. After a while, one of the stars caught my attention. It wasn't brighter than the rest. It just felt off, like it wasn't quite following the same invisible path as the others. I focused on it more and realized it hadn't shifted at all compared to the rest of the sky. Everything else drifted, subtle but steady. That one didn't. I frowned and pointed a finger at it, tracking carefully. "Come on," I muttered. "Move." I figured maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, so I blinked a few times and looked elsewhere, then back again. Still fixed. A few seconds later, it twitched. Not flashed. Moved. Just a slight sideways nudge, then paused again. My stomach tightened a bit. I sat up slightly, resting my elbows on the hood, eyes locked on that single point of light. It looked ordinary, like any other star, except for that faint movement. Then it shifted again. This time in a short diagonal line, like a lazy pen stroke moving upward and left. It didn't streak, didn't fade, just slid. My pulse picked up, slow and intentional, like a quiet alarm going off deep in my chest. "Okay, that's not normal," I whispered. The star paused again, perfectly still for a few seconds, then moved in the opposite direction, tracing a smooth zigzag through the empty space around it. Not fast, not erratic, just deliberate. There was no sound, no plane noise, no flicker of light below, just silent movement that didn't line up with anything I knew the sky was supposed to do. My phone buzzed faintly beside me on the hood. A text from my friend Kieran, who'd been driving back from Reno and was supposed to pass by soon. I picked it up and typed, "Hey, I'm pulled off near marker 188. You close?" "5 mins," he replied. I glanced back up at the star. It had stopped again, then shifted once more. Another slow zig, another zag. The air around me felt slightly cooler now, like the night had sharpened somehow. Even the distant hum of the highway, faint as it was, seemed quieter. When Kieran's headlights finally appeared in the distance, I felt oddly relieved. Not because I felt in danger, but because the idea of someone else seeing this too meant I wasn't alone with it. He pulled in beside me, gravel crunching softly under his tires. The moment his engine turned off, the night returned to its stretched silence. "You okay?" he called out as he stepped from the car. "Yeah," I said. "Just look up." He tilted his head back, scanning lazily at first. "What am I looking for?" "That star right there," I said, pointing directly toward it. "Watch it." He squinted. "Which one? They all look the same. The one that's not moving like the rest. It looks fine to me. Just wait." As if it heard us, the star slid once more, a small zigzag, careful and smooth. "There," I said quickly. "Did you see that?" He narrowed his eyes. "It moved?" "Yeah." It stopped now. We both watched it in absolute silence. It didn't move again. Not a single twitch. It just sat there, blending completely back into the quiet pattern of the sky, indistinguishable from every other point of light. "You sure that wasn't just your eye?" he asked after a moment. "I watched it zigzag," I said. "Twice. It wasn't a plane." He shifted his stance. I didn't hear anything. Neither did I. We stood there longer than needed, staring upward like it might suddenly reveal itself again, but the sky held still. No more strange movement, no shifting, no drifting, just stars behaving the way they always had. Kieran eventually shrugged. "You've been out here too long, man. Terrain messes with your brain." "Yeah," I murmured, but my chest still felt tight in a quiet way. We leaned against our cars for a bit, while talking about random things, the drive, the heat, the slow week. But I kept glancing back up every few seconds, studying the same section of sky. Nothing. Eventually, he said his goodbyes and pulled back onto the road, taillights fading down the long, dark stretch. I stayed another 10 minutes after that, refusing to let curiosity completely win, but not ready to shake it off either. The star didn't move again. Still, as I walked back around to the driver's seat, the sense of having witnessed something that wasn't meant to perform in front of me lingered quietly under my skin. The drive home passed without incident. The road stayed empty. The air cooled steadily. The The desert folded back into its usual nighttime hush. When I pulled into my driveway and shut the engine off, the normal softness of my regular world came back. Porch light glowing, sprinkler ticking faintly, my neighbor's dog rustling in their yard. Inside, I dropped my keys on the counter and poured a glass of water, hands still slightly warm from the steering wheel. Everything felt mundane again. Still, out of habit more than fear, I stepped onto my back porch and looked up. The stars stretched endlessly above. None of them moved. None of them zigged or zagged. They just existed, steady and distant and quiet. I stayed a minute longer anyway, just to be sure, before finally heading inside and letting the door close gently behind me. The knock came at my door before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. I just rolled out of bed, still half asleep, and I almost ignored it because it was too early for anything good. When I opened the door, my neighbor Marlene stood there in her housecoat, hair still a little wild, eyes wide in a way that made my chest tighten before she even spoke. "You know there were lights all over your house last night?" she asked. "What?" I said, probably too flat. "Bright ones, not like cop lights, not like a car. They were right over your roof, moved slow and quiet." I blinked at her. "I was asleep, Marlene. I figured, that's why I didn't call you. But I watched them for a while, around 2, maybe 2:30. They just hovered. Then they went out." I stared past her at the front yard, trying to piece it together. The street looked normal, damp from the overnight drizzle, gray sky pressing low, sparrows hopping around the bushes. "You sure it was my place?" I asked. "Yes, Nolan. This house." I stood at my window and watched them. "I thought maybe you were having work done or something, but there was no truck." "Okay," I said, forcing a small laugh. "Probably just reflections or something weird in the fog." She didn't smile back. It wasn't foggy. It was clear. After she walked back to her place, I shut the door and stood there longer than necessary, listening to the quiet inside. My name is Nolan Reeves, and I'd lived in this small place outside Maplebrook for 5 years without anything stranger than raccoons tipping over my trash. Her words stayed sitting in my chest. I remembered the outdoor camera over my garage, the cheap one I'd installed after someone tried my car handle a few months back. I grabbed my phone and opened the app, scrolling through the timeline. Sure enough, there was a spike at 2:14 a.m. Motion detected. I tapped the clip. The screen showed my front yard bathed in ordinary moonlight, the driveway, the bushes swaying slightly. Then, about 5 seconds in, the whole image turned blinding white. Not a flash like lightning, more like someone turned the sun on for a second. Then black. When the feed returned, the yard looked normal again. No figures, no shadows, no movement, just that wash of light, then darkness, then empty yard. I watched it 4 more times, hoping I missed something. There was nothing. I checked the timestamp. It skipped from 2:4:36 to 2:15:59. A minute and 23 seconds just gone. I felt a chill that didn't match the temperature in the room. I tried the backyard camera next. Same thing. Slight brightening, full whiteout, then normal image with an awkward gap in time. Nothing else registered. No movement across the yard. No car headlights sweeping past. No branch swaying violently. Just that soft burn of light and missing time. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at my phone, listening to the hum of the fridge and the faint ticking of the wall clock. My dog, Rufus, wandered in and sniffed my leg before settling at my feet, calm and unbothered. "You notice anything last night?" I asked him, half joking. He just yawned. All morning I kept checking the feed, replaying the same moment. Around noon, I stepped outside to look around the property. The grass looked the same. No scorch marks, no depression in the dirt, no anything. If I hadn't seen the video, I never would have known something had happened. The rest of the day dragged. Clouds rolled in thick and low, the air heavy and damp. The normal sounds of the neighborhood drifted around me, but felt oddly distant. That night, I left the porch light on and kept the camera feed open on my tablet, set beside the couch. I didn't tell anyone else. Didn't feel like trying to explain how a white light erased a piece of time without sounding ridiculous. Around 1:30 a.m., Rufus lifted his head suddenly. "What is it?" I murmured. He stared toward the front door, but didn't bark. A few seconds later, my tablet screen flared white. The camera feed vanished into brightness again. This time, I watched it happen live, heart hammering hard enough to feel in my neck. No sound came with it, no hum, no crackle. Just light. Everywhere. Then silence. Darkness. Then the normal yard returned. The timestamp jumped again. My skin crawled in a way that wasn't panic, just sharp recognition that I was aware of something I wasn't supposed to understand. I got up slowly and peeked through the curtain. Outside looked normal. The sky was overcast, dull silver, no stars visible, the street empty. Marlene's porch light hummed gently across the road. Rufus whined softly at my feet. "Easy, buddy," I whispered. I stayed like that for a few minutes before going back to the couch. The air in the house felt heavier somehow, like it held more weight. I kept the tablet on, but nothing else happened. The next morning, Marlene knocked again. "They came back," she said without greeting. "Same lights, same spot, right over your roof." "Did you get a look at them?" I asked. Not clearly, they weren't sharp, just bright and kind of spread out, like a glow too close to the ground. "How long did they stay?" "A minute or two, then just gone." "Any sound?" "Nope," I nodded, trying to stay calm. "Probably some weird electrical thing then." She studied my face like she didn't believe me, then shrugged and walked away. That night, I didn't watch the feed. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the moment it might happen again. The house creaked like normal. Pipes shifted. Down the road, a car passed. At 2:11 a.m., the bedroom walls brightened faintly. Not enough to blind me this time. Just a soft, pale glow creeping through the curtains, like headlights parked too close. I sat up slowly. The light strengthened, bathing the edge of the room without casting sharp shadows. Outside, somewhere above the roof, that same quiet presence hovered again. I couldn't see it directly, only feel the change it made in the night around me. I waited for the familiar flicker of the camera audio alert. Nothing pinged, just the glow. Then it faded. Gone again. By morning, the footage showed the same whiteout and lost time as before. No trace of motion. No sign of what passed through my yard. The days went back to normal after that, but the sense that something had noticed my house refused to leave. Every night, I locked the doors a little more deliberately and listened to the quiet just a second longer. And every now and then, when the yard sat too still and the sky looked just a little too pale, I caught myself wondering what had come close enough to wash my whole world in light and then vanish without ever showing its shape. The radio snapped to static so sharply that I jumped in my seat. I'd been sitting in the far corner of the Valley Grow lot, engine idling, watching the grocery store's sliding doors open and close while I waited for my sister to text back. It was early evening, that bluish-gray time right before full dark, and a thin layer of snow covered the pavement, reflecting the tired yellow glow of the overhead lights. Somewhere off behind the strip mall, the mountains sat like dark shapes against the low clouds. One second, my station was playing a soft country song. The next, it was just harsh white noise. I reached for the dial, assuming the signal cut out again. That happens sometimes out here, but before I could touch anything, the static dropped into a low humming tone. Not music, not a signal, just a steady sound, almost too smooth to be mechanical. At the same time, a pale light swept across the windshield. It wasn't the glare of someone else's headlights. It moved from the front of the car up over the roofline like something passed directly above me. Slow, controlled. Then it faded into the low clouds without any clear source. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I leaned forward and looked through the windshield, scanning the sky. All I could see were thick gray clouds hanging low, pressing down on the landscape. The humming tone continued through the speakers, steady and faint, like someone had tuned into a frequency that didn't exist. I twisted the volume knob down. It didn't change. I turned the radio off entirely. The hum remained. That made my stomach drop a little. "Okay," I muttered to the empty car. I tried again, clicking the radio button on and off, still there. The same low tone filled the cabin like it didn't care what I wanted. Outside, the lot stayed normal. A pickup rolled past slowly, tires crunching over thin snow. A guy pushed a cart toward his trunk. Nobody looked up. The pale light didn't return. I sat there waiting for something else to happen, unsure what exactly I expected. The hum softened slightly but never disappeared. After about a minute, it faded back into static, then snapped back to my usual station like nothing had happened. The song resumed mid-verse. I stared at the dashboard longer than necessary, then glanced up again at the sky. Just clouds, just dull winter night settling in. When my phone buzzed, I flinched harder than made sense. It was Celeste, my sister, telling me she'd gotten held up at work and would be another 20 minutes. I texted back that I was still parked and fine, even though fine felt like the wrong word. I shifted in my seat, trying to shake off the weird prickling on my arms. The car heater hummed softly. The normal world crept back in bit by bit. Then the light passed overhead again. Softer this time, more spread out, like a wide glow sliding across the low clouds rather than a sharp beam. It moved steadily, covering the length of my windshield in a few seconds, then disappeared into the sky above the grocery store roof. My radio cut out again, static. Then that same low hum threaded back through the speakers, deeper now, more present. A pressure settled around the car, not heavy, just noticeable, like the air had tightened around me. I leaned my head back and looked straight up through the windshield. The clouds looked thicker than before, but there was a faint brightness bleeding through one section, diffused and formless. The hum synced strangely with my breathing, not matching it, but feeling aware of it. I swallowed slowly. "Is someone screwing with me?" I muttered again, half hoping someone nearby would suddenly laugh. No one did. A cold sensation crept into the cabin even though the heater was blowing warm air. The inside windows began to fog slightly, breath collecting more than it should have. I glanced at the rearview mirror, expecting to see flashing lights or some prank setup behind me. Nothing. Just empty snowy pavement and the dim shapes of parked cars. The hum persisted, unwavering. It didn't feel aggressive. It just felt deliberate. That's what unnerved me most. It felt like something had noticed my car and paused. The glow edged back faintly above the windshield, still formless, like light moving beneath clouds too thick to show what caused it. I couldn't pinpoint its source. It just hovered. My phone buzzed again on the passenger seat and startled me enough that my heart stuttered. I didn't pick it up immediately. I just watched the pale, drifting glow. The light slowly moved forward and vanished again, sinking into the dim sky like it had never existed. The hum reduced slightly, thinning like it moved farther away. Then the radio snapped back into place, playing static for a second before returning to soft music. Everything returned to normal, too normal. I sat still for a few moments, breathing shallow, trying to convince myself I'd imagined the pattern of it. The sound, the timing, the way the light moved with calm certainty. A snowflake tapped lightly against the windshield, then another. I shook my arms out, forced my shoulders down, and tried to ground myself in the ordinary. The radio behaved now. The heater warmed the air. The grocery store doors slid open with familiar mechanical rhythm. A couple stepped outside laughing, oblivious to the stretch of strange that had just unfolded yards away. Celeste finally pulled into the spot beside me, rolling down her window slightly. "You okay?" she asked, noticing my expression. "Yeah," I said too quickly. Radio just glitched. She squinted, unconvinced, but let it go. We drove back toward my place without anything else strange happening. The sky remained overcast. The town stayed quiet. Familiar roads passed beneath the headlights, but every now and then, when the road curved and I caught sight of the cloud cover through the windshield, I thought I saw that faint pale glow again, just barely tracing the underside of the sky, like drifting in a direction I couldn't track. When I parked outside my apartment and shut off the engine for good, the radio behaved as it always had. No hum, no static, just silence. Still, before I got out, I took one last look upward. The clouds sat low and heavy, hiding whatever moved above them, and for a moment I could almost feel that same low vibration lingering in the air, faint but patient, like it hadn't gone very far. The warm air hit me like I'd stepped into a different pocket of weather. It was just after sunset, that low, dull orange phase where everything loses its sharp edges, and I was cutting across the open field behind the Renshaw property to save time getting home. I'd done it 100 times before. It was an empty stretch of uneven grass, a few scattered weeds, and a line of bare trees at the far end that marked the creek. Quiet, predictable, safe enough. Except that evening, about halfway through, the temperature suddenly shifted. The rest of the field was cool, the usual early fall chill creeping up through the soles of my shoes. Then I stepped forward and felt warmth roll over my face and arms like I'd walked too close to a space heater. It wasn't wind. It wasn't sunlight. The sun was already almost gone. I stopped instinctively and looked down at the ground, half expecting something obvious like smoldering grass or some weird vent. Nothing. Just flat earth and faintly bent stems. I moved my foot forward another step, still warm. Behind me, cool air again. In front, warmer. The change was so precise it didn't feel natural. I lifted my eyes and followed the air upward. That's when I saw the shimmer. It hovered about 10 feet above the ground, barely visible unless you angled your head just right. A faint distortion, like heat rippling off asphalt, but slower and more controlled. It pulsed gently, not flickering, not aggressive. Just pulsing, like a breath. "What is that?" I murmured, though the field swallowed the sound. My name's Eric Kallman, and I work delivery most days, so I spent a lot of time outside. I knew how the air moved. I knew how heat rose. This didn't behave like anything normal. The shimmer held its spot above the warm patch, its edges soft and undefined. No color, just slight warping of the air, enough to make the horizon behind it wobble faintly. I shifted my weight, unsure if stepping closer or farther made more sense. A faint smell hung in the air too. Not smoke, not grass. Something neutral and metallic, like cold pennies left in the sun. I took one slow step closer. The warmth deepened slightly, but the shimmer didn't change position. No sound came from it. No buzzing. No movement other than that steady pulse. I glanced around the field, half expecting someone else to be standing there staring at the same thing. No one. The town sat quiet behind me. A faint dog barked somewhere far off, then silence returned. The shimmer pulsed again. I couldn't explain why, but the longer I watched it, the more the sense of being noticed crept in, slow and cold beneath the warmth. Not watched by eyes, just acknowledged. I lifted my hand tentatively toward it. The air near my fingertips felt slightly heavier, like pushing into humidity too early in the day. I didn't touch anything. There was nothing to touch. But as I pulled my hand back, the shimmer briefly brightened, just a fraction, then softened again. My stomach tightened. "This isn't right," I whispered. The pulse slowed. The warmth around my legs and chest remained, consistent and calm. Time felt stretched thin, like the moment had more space than it should. I took a cautious step backward. The warmth lingered for half a second, then faded as my foot left that patch of ground. The air surrounding me returned to cool and crisp like the rest of the evening. The shimmer remained suspended. I swallowed and stepped back again, exiting the warm zone fully. Now I stood just outside it, looking into that slightly distorted pocket of air. It kept pulsing. Not following treating, just existing. A breeze stirred through the field, bending the tall grass around it, but the shimmer didn't waver. The warm pocket didn't move. Everything else obeyed the wind, but that space felt immune. I stood there unsure how long, seconds or minutes blurring together. Then the shimmer began to thin. At first, it just softened, the distortion becoming less defined, like someone slowly lowering the opacity of it. The warmth weakened slightly. The pulse grew more subtle. The shimmer's edges faded slowly outward, the air returning to normal clarity piece by piece. The warm zone cooled at the same time. No sudden change, no drama, just a careful dissolving. Within a few moments, nothing remained. The field looked exactly the same as it had every other day of my life, except now I knew something had briefly occupied that spot. I stood there longer, breathing steady but shallow, staring at the place where it had been, waiting for any sign it would return. Nothing did. The air felt identical everywhere now, cool and ordinary. I stepped forward tentatively into the spot. No warmth. No shimmer, just flattened grass and fading light. A breeze pushed through again, rustling weeds and brushing against my jacket, as if trying to remind me that the world still worked the way it always had. I started walking again, slower this time, glancing over my shoulder once every few steps. The field stayed empty. The trees stood still. The sky dimmed further into a hazy dusk. When I reached the far end near the gravel road, I stopped and looked back one last time. No distortion, no heat, just a quiet piece of land absorbing the last traces of daylight. I walked the rest of the way home in silence, the normal sounds of evening slowly returning around me. Crickets starting up, a distant TV through an open window, something like normal life. Inside my house, everything felt the same too. No lingering warmth on my skin, no odd smell, just quiet, worn comfort. Still, when I changed out of my jacket, I noticed my sleeves felt slightly warm near the cuffs, like they'd been near something heated a little too long. By full nightfall, that warmth had faded too. But the memory of that pulsing shimmer above the field stayed sharp, tucked behind my thoughts, weightless and unexplained, like it had only passed through for a moment and left before it needed to justify itself. The first light appeared right as I set my coffee down on the cold wooden railing. It was just after 5 in the morning, that thin stretch of time before the sun even thought about coming up. I'd driven out to Harrow Point because I couldn't sleep again, and the pier was the only place around here that felt quiet without feeling crowded. The ocean was flat and dark, the air damp with that salty chill that crept into your bones if you stood still too long. My name's Callum Pierce, and I'd lived along this stretch of coast most of my life. I knew what boats looked like at a distance. I knew what buoys looked like. I knew how the moonlight hit the water when the sky stayed clear. This wasn't any of that. A small white dot just hovered above the surface about 50 yards out, glowing faintly like a reflection that forgot to ripple. It didn't bob. It didn't waver. It just held there, perfectly still, as if pinned to the air. I frowned and squinted, trying to find some rational angle for it. Maybe a fishing light? Maybe someone had anchored a boat in the dark? Then another light appeared beside it. Then another. 3, 4, 5. A neat row of pale points arranged in a gentle curve, hovering just above the slowly breathing water. No sound came from them. No buzzing. No splash. The waves moved beneath without ever disturbing their position. I set my mug down carefully and leaned forward, gripping the railing. "What are you?" I muttered, though my voice sounded strangely small against the open water. The fog hung low around the pier, thin enough to see through, but thick enough to blur the edges of everything. The lights glowed steady, almost calm. The longer I stared, the more wrong it felt that nothing else on the surface responded to them. A fishing boat should rock, should creak, should shift. These didn't. I glanced down the length of the pier behind me, half expecting to see someone else standing there staring too. But the boards stretched empty past the old bait shack, damp and dark, no movement except an occasional seagull settling. I looked back at the lights. They hadn't moved at all. My pulse quickened, not explosive panic, just awareness, like when you realize a stranger has been standing too close for too long. Then, without slowing, the first light sank straight down. No ripple, no splash, just dipped below the surface and vanished. Then the second followed, then the third. They didn't drift. They didn't fade. Each one lowered with strange precision and disappeared beneath the water like it was being gently pulled into another place. The last light remained for a few seconds longer, hovering alone, then sank as well. The ocean returned to darkness. I stood frozen, half bent over the railing, waiting to see something surface. Waiting for a wave or a sign that any of it made sense. Nothing came. Just gentle water and a tired fog. I straightened slowly and looked around again as if someone had to be messing with me. The horizon looked empty. No boats, no silhouettes, no reflections. A thin breeze stirred the back of my neck. I waited another minute, then another. Nothing reappeared. The logical part of my brain tried to step in, maybe lights from a distant structure, maybe reflections from a passing vessel I couldn't see, but the way they lowered so cleanly didn't line up with anything I knew. I turned and walked halfway down the pier, listening to my shoes tap softly against the damp planks. The gulls stayed quiet. The water lapped slow and even. Everything else returned to its normal state, like nothing odd had occurred. But the feeling didn't fade. I kept glancing out across the same stretch of water, expecting the lights to break through again. They didn't. I let out a slow breath and told myself I'd imagined the sinking part, that maybe fatigue and fog had twisted perspective, that I just needed sleep. Still, I didn't feel brave enough to walk back toward the car right away. I leaned against one of the wooden support posts and watched the horizon until the sky began to lighten just slightly. A soft gray started bleeding into the far edge of the ocean. The fog thinned. The day crept back. Just as I began to relax, I noticed another faint glow farther down the water. A single point. Motionless. My shoulders tensed faster this time. It didn't multiply. It just stayed there, barely shimmering, the same pale white I'd seen before. I held my breath, waiting. Slowly, another appeared beside it, then another, a new row forming farther out. My skin prickled. I stepped closer to the edge of the pier, ignoring the slick boards under my boots. The lights hovered again, just above the surface, maintaining the same careful spacing as before. The fog around them caught the glow faintly, creating a dim halo. They stayed still for longer this time, longer than felt comfortable. No boat emerged, no explanation revealed itself. Then, one by one, they sank again, straight down, gone. The ocean smoothed over as if they'd never been there at all. A sickness twisted gently in my stomach, not sharp, not overwhelming, just unsettled. Like something had calmly happened in front of me and refused to include any logic. I backed away from the railing and glanced over my shoulder again, the quiet behind me suddenly feeling heavier than usual. Still no one. I told myself this time I was leaving. I turned and walked down the length of the pier toward the parking lot, every creak of the wood echoing louder than it should have. The air warmed slowly as the sun started painting pale color along the edge of the horizon. From the lot, I couldn't see the same spot where the lights had hovered, but the calm of the water felt deceptive now, like it remembered something I didn't. The drive home passed without anything else strange. Normal early traffic, normal sleepy faces at the corner gas station, normal light blooming across the town like it always had. Still, every time I thought about that moment, the sinking of those lights replayed too clearly. That evening, after the sun dipped and the sky returned to soft gray, I found myself checking the time without fully meaning to. By 9, sleep still wouldn't come. By 10, I felt pulled again. I didn't fight it. I drove back to the pier, parking in almost the same spot as before. The air felt calmer now, less fog, more still. The water darker. I walked out slowly, each step carrying more weight than before. The pier greeted me with the same hollow quiet. I reached the railing and stared across the black surface. No lights, just water. I stayed there for a long while, scanning and waiting. Then, faintly, a single glow appeared far out, lower than before, dimmer. It hovered for just a moment like a quiet reminder, and then it sank, gone again. The sky returned to darkness, leaving only the faint reflection of stars rippling across the calm water. The glow woke me before I even realized I'd opened my eyes. My bedroom felt dim but not dark, like someone had turned on a soft lamp and pointed it at the ceiling. The problem was, I didn't have any lights on. My curtains were pulled shut the way I always left them, thick enough to block out the street lamp across the road. Still, the walls held this faint pale color, like washed-out moonlight, but stronger. I pushed myself up on my elbows and looked around, confused and sleepy. My phone screen on the nightstand read 3:17 a.m. The light didn't flicker. It didn't pulse. It just sat there, quiet and even, filling the corners of the room without any obvious source. I slid out of bed and padded over to the window. The curtains felt cool under my fingers as I pulled them apart just enough to peek through. Outside, above the quiet line of houses across the street, a soft glow drifted slowly through the sky. It wasn't sharp or blinding, more like a wide blur of pale white with a faint yellow tint, moving carefully from left to right like it had all the time in the world. No sound came from it. No wind changed. No dogs barked. It just glided, perfectly smooth, low enough that it passed just above the rooftops. My heart started beating harder, not in panic, just sudden awareness. "What the hell?" I whispered. The glow continued its slow path, sliding past the neighbor's chimney, then over the maple tree by Mrs. Calderon's yard. The whole street stayed asleep. No lights flipped on. No one came to their window. It felt like the world had paused to let this thing pass through. I pressed my forehead lightly to the cool glass, trying to catch more detail. It didn't look solid. It didn't look like any drone or helicopter I'd ever seen. It didn't cast a clear beam or shadow, just this floating smear of light that moved too smoothly to belong to anything mechanical. It finally drifted behind the row of houses at the far end of the block and vanished without a trace. The moment it disappeared, my room went dark again. I stood there, eyes adjusting, listening for anything that might follow. No hum, no echo, just the faint ticking of my old wall clock and the low hum of the fridge down the hall. I stayed by the window another minute, staring into the quiet streets like maybe it would come back. Nothing happened. I crawled back into bed and pulled the blanket up, trying to convince myself it had been a dream fragment slipping into reality. But my sheets were cool. My room smelled the same. My dog, Waffle, slept curled at my feet, breathing slow and steady. About 10 minutes later, I noticed the room faintly brighten again. Not as strong as before, but enough that the ceiling pale washed color returned just a little. I sat up immediately. The glow had returned, now lower, sliding more slowly this time, as if it decided to take a longer look. I got up again and pulled the curtain aside. It moved across the sky with the same deliberate calm, drifting behind the rooftops and disappearing into the darkness beyond the far yards. Still silent. Still smooth. Still wrong. I checked my phone again. 3:29 a.m. My stomach felt tight, but not scared in a way I could easily explain. It felt like that moment before someone speaks directly to you in a quiet room. I didn't sleep after that. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the normal sounds of the neighborhood slowly return. A distant car passed. Pipes clicked as the heater cycled. Somewhere, someone coughed. By sunrise, everything looked normal again. The sky was clear and washed pale blue, the kind that made you second-guess anything strange that happened overnight. Kids walked past on their way to the bus stop. Mrs. Calderon watered her petunias like always. The world had reset. Still, I kept watching the upper edge of rooftops whenever I stepped outside. Later that afternoon, I texted my friend Mateo about it, half joking, half not. He told me I probably caught a weird reflection or weather balloon, something normal I just never paid attention to before. I wanted to believe that. But when night fell again and the house went quiet, I felt myself staying more alert than usual. I didn't turn off my bedside lamp until I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore. Sometime long after midnight, the glow returned. This time it didn't wake me with brightness. It woke me with the strange absence of darkness. I opened my eyes and saw the corners of my room lit the same pale way as before. My body tensed before my mind fully caught up. Again, I moved to the window. Again, the soft drifting glow floated just above the homes, but now it moved slower, like it lingered. It passed over the roof of my own house, so close I felt like if I reached up, I might touch whatever surface emitted that light. Still no sound. Still no clear shape. Just this wide, floating presence sliding past with quiet certainty. I felt watched, not by eyes, not by something I could see, just the sensation of being noticed. The glow paused briefly, almost imperceptibly, hovering just beyond the roofline like it hesitated. Then it continued drifting, easing behind the distant houses and dissolving into night again. The room returned to full darkness, leaving me standing alone at the window, unsure if my breathing had been that shallow the whole time. I didn't tell anyone else after that. Not because it felt unbelievable, but because I couldn't find the right way to describe how quiet it had been, how smooth, how carefully it moved, like it wasn't bound by the same rules as everything else around it. For the next few nights, nothing happened. No glow, no faint light creeping through the curtains. Just a normal black sky and the steady low buzz of sleep. Eventually, the tension faded slightly, but every night when I lay down, my eyes stayed on the faint outline of the window just a beat too long, waiting to see if that soft, drifting light would return and glide past my home again, silent and slow, as if it had simply taken a detour through my street for reasons I wasn't meant to understand. The moon dimmed like someone had slowly dragged a thin curtain across it. I noticed it about halfway down Briarwood Loop, right where the houses spaced out a little and the streetlights stopped lining up so neatly. I was driving my old Civic back from dropping off takeout for my cousin Renata, windows halfway down because the air was still warm and heavy even though it was past 11. Early October, but holding on to that sticky summer feel. It had been a normal, quiet drive until that point. Everyone's porch lights were off. No kids out, no music drifting through open windows. Just the soft tires on asphalt sound and the faint hum of my engine. Then the moonlight softened. Not a cloud passing over it, not the usual shift you see when haze creeps in. It was like a smooth shadow slid straight across its surface, darkening it evenly, as if something very large and close moved between it and the neighborhood. It didn't flicker. It didn't jerk. It just glided. I slowed without meaning to, my foot easing off the gas while my eyes followed the pale circle hanging above the rooftops. The shadow moved from one side to the other with a strange steadiness. No sound came with it. No wind. No shift in temperature. For a few seconds, the moon looked dull, almost gray and flat. Then the shadow slid away, and the brightness returned like nothing had happened. I muttered, "What was that?" But no one was there to hear me. I glanced around the street to see if anyone else had reacted. No doors opened, no lights flipped on. The neighborhood stayed asleep. I kept driving, but a weird tightness settled in my chest. The kind you get when you start noticing all the quiet details too closely. A few houses later, my headlights swept across a parked sedan and a cluster of mailboxes. Everything looked normal, yet the feeling didn't fade. I forced out a breath and tried to laugh it off. Planes pass over all the time, I told myself. Or birds, or some weird reflection. Still, the way it had blocked the moon so cleanly didn't match any usual shadow I'd ever seen. The street curved toward Willow Ridge, the part of the suburb where no one ever seemed to be outside even during the day. Taller hedges, deeper driveways, longer gaps between houses. It felt cut off from the rest of town in an almost intentional way. As I passed the Morgan place, my radio cut to static for about a second. No warning, just a sudden hiss, then back to the late-night DJ rambling about weather updates. I checked the dial. Nothing had changed. I turned down the volume anyway. A few seconds later, the moon dimmed again. This time, I stopped completely, right in the middle of the empty road. The shadow slid across the moon at the same slow, steady pace as before. No change in speed, no variation. Just smooth movement, like something massive was gliding across a track only I could see. I lowered my window fully and tilted my head up. The night air felt warm but heavier somehow, thick like it had settled. No engine hum crossed overhead, no faint whoosh of wings, nothing. Just that silent, sliding darkness against the moon. When the light returned, I realized I'd been holding my breath. I let it go slowly and stared up at the sky a moment longer, trying to catch anything else moving along the edge of visibility. Nothing. I sat there another second, then shook my head and rolled forward again. Even though logic kept trying to explain it away, a low unease wrapped around me like something sticking too close to my back. As I drove deeper into the neighborhood, the silence grew heavier. Not total silence, just dampened. Like the world was slightly padded. My tires sounded softer. Leaves barely rustled. I checked my phone on the passenger seat. No notifications, no glitching, all normal. The idea that someone else could have seen that and reacted made me feel a little less alone, but no one had come outside. That annoyed me more than it should have. I glanced up again. The moon stayed bright for a while. I relaxed a fraction, then noticed a faint shape pass over it once more. This time I saw the shape's edge more clearly. It wasn't round, not clean. It looked uneven, like a long, smooth curve with subtle dips, as if it wasn't meant to be rigid. It moved sideways again. Consistent, calm, silent. The air around my car felt still, as if the night itself paused around whatever passed overhead. I slowed to a crawl. The shadow finished crossing and the moon went back to its usual pale glow. A dog barked somewhere far off, breaking the strange hush just slightly. The sound faded fast. I swallowed and forced myself to keep moving, even though every instinct told me to go home fast and not look back. When I reached the turn toward my street, the headlights reflected faintly off a stop sign and the damp pavement. I turned, feeling the normal buzz of the car under my hands again, like it was grounding me. But the sense of being watched crept up slowly. I felt it before I could fully admit it. Not eyes on the ground, above, somewhere higher than the houses, beyond the edges of what I could clearly see. I glanced upward again, trying to look casual like a person just checking the sky. Nothing. Just moon and faint stars and the outline of rooftops against the dark. Still, that odd awareness stayed. Halfway down my street, the porch light of the Grayson house flickered once. Just a brief dim and then normal again. My headlights softened momentarily like they'd passed through thinner air, but the road stayed solid. I parked in front of my place and shut off the engine. Silence folded around me. The moon looked normal again, bright, still. I sat there longer than usual, hands resting on the wheel, just listening to the late suburban quiet. No breeze passed, no cars rolled by, no movement in the trees. The world felt paused, but not frozen, more like aware. I stepped out and shut the car door with deliberate care, glancing up immediately once more. The moon remained steady, no dimming now, No strange edges drifting across. The sense of something hovering just slightly too near faded a little, but not entirely. When I walked toward the front door, my shadow on the pavement looked a touch darker than it should have been. Inside, the house felt normal. The fridge kicked on. The faint ticking of the kitchen clock filled the space. Still, before I turned on any lights, I checked the moon one last time through the front window. It held steady and bright like it had done 1,000 nights before, but I couldn't shake the memory of that smooth shadow sliding over it, deliberate and silent, as if something enormous passed without ever needing to announce itself. And the fact that it happened more than once stayed lodged in my mind long after the night finally returned to its regular quiet. A soft glow pressed through the edges of my curtains, thin and pale, like someone had parked a car right outside and left the high beams on. I squinted at it, still half in that heavy, fuzzy sleep where everything feels slow. I checked my phone on the nightstand. It read 2:18 a.m., no notifications, no missed calls, just the time and the dull blue screen. The glow didn't pulse or move. It just stayed there, seeping in around the fabric in a way that felt wrong somehow. Too even. Too quiet. I rolled onto my back and listened. No engines. No footsteps. No voices outside. Just the low hum of my fridge through the wall and the faint ticking of the old heater. After a few seconds, curiosity won out over comfort. I pushed myself up and crept over to the window, bare feet cold against the floorboards. I slid the curtain aside slowly, expecting to see a car or maybe some weirdo shining a flashlight around the yard. Instead, I saw the pale glow lifting upward. It rose straight up past the top of the window frame, soundless, smooth, like a dim orb or dome drifting into the dark. No flicker, no trail. Just a quiet retreat into the cloudy sky until the night swallowed it. The backyard looked normal again. My fence, the patch of overgrown grass, the crooked old birdbath. No source for the light anywhere. I stood there, curtain still in my hand, staring out like I'd missed something important by a second. My name's Adrian Velez. I lived alone in a rented duplex just outside Port Angeles, close enough to hear the distant waves when the wind shifted right. It had been drizzling earlier that evening, the kind of light coastal rain that left everything damp and smelling slightly metallic already, but this felt different. I cracked the window open a few inches and leaned out. Cold air rolled in, salty and wet. No fresh light, no noise. Just darkness and the soft murmur of far-off surf. I waited. Nothing else happened. Eventually, I shut the window and pulled the curtains closed. I stood there a while longer, listening for an engine start or footsteps on wet gravel, but the night stayed still. Back in bed, sleep didn't come easy. Every tiny sound made my eyes snap open. The old floor creaking in the hallway, the pipes shifting as the heater kicked on and off. I kept glancing back at the curtains, half expecting that glow to seep through again. It didn't. When I finally drifted off, it was shallow and restless. The next morning was gray and foggy, the kind of fog that smeared the outline of everything and made distance hard to judge. I convinced myself maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Half dream, half reflection of passing headlights. That happens sometimes. But when I stepped out onto the back porch to take the trash out, I noticed the grass right beneath my bedroom window looked flattened in a neat circular patch. Not trampled, exactly, just gently bent, like something had pressed down evenly and then lifted away. I crouched, running my fingers over the damp blades. No footprints, no tire tracks, just that smooth, shallow depression in the grass. I shook it off and went about my day. By afternoon, I was back at my job on the docks, unloading shipments with my coworker Mateo, trying not to think about it. But all day I caught myself glancing up at the low clouds, scanning for anything out of place. Nothing appeared. That evening, I mentioned it casually to my neighbor Denise while we both checked our mail. "You ever see weird lights around here at night?" I asked, trying to sound normal. She laughed softly. "Only the usual drunk tourists and their flashlights." "Why?" "Just thought I saw something last night. Probably a reflection." She shrugged and shuffled back inside, not concerned at all. The next few nights passed quietly, enough to lull me even more into thinking it had been a fluke. But then, 3 days later, it happened again. This time, I wasn't asleep. I'd been lying on the couch watching a rerun with the volume low when the living room slowly filled with that same pale light. It crept across the carpet and up the walls like fog made of glow. I muted the TV and sat up straight. The glow wasn't harsh. It wasn't warm either, just steady and dim enough to notice. I approached the sliding glass door that looked out to the backyard. Outside, floating just above the fence line, a rounded haze of light hung completely still. No shape I could clearly define, but not just mist either. It held its form in an unnatural way, like it had edges that my eyes refused to focus on. My throat tightened. I stood there frozen, hand hovering over the door handle, unsure whether opening it was the worst decision or the only way to prove I wasn't losing it. The glow slid sideways, slow and deliberate, tracing along the top of the fence before drifting upward again into the fog, dissolving without a sound. The backyard returned to darkness. I looked at my phone again. 11:36 p.m. This time, the signal bars flickered and dropped to 0 before settling back. A chill crept along my arms. The air felt heavier for a moment, pressed flat and still. Even the distant ocean noise seemed to fade. I didn't open the door, I just stood there until my legs started shaking. That night, I double-checked every lock, every latch, every window. When I finally crawled into bed, I left the curtains slightly open, eyes fixed on the glass, replaying that silent upward drift over and over. Sometime after midnight, I heard a faint vibration through the floor, almost like a large truck passing, except there was no rumble to go with it. Just enough motion to make the water in the bedside glass ripple slightly. Then it stopped. No glow this time, no light, just subtle silence again. I stayed awake for hours, staring, listening, trying to piece together what kind of normal thing could cause all of this. Morning came slow and colorless. The fog clung to the edges of everything. I stepped outside again and noticed the same subtle flattening in the grass, extended farther this time, wider, almost like an impression from something round, but too light to leave actual marks. I felt embarrassed even thinking of it, but I still took a photo on my phone. When I checked the image later, the patch looked less defined than I remembered, just slightly darker grass. The following night, I didn't see the glow, but I smelled it instead. That cold metallic scent drifted faintly through my bedroom, sharp and clean, nothing like damp soil or ocean air. It lingered for a minute, then vanished as if someone had shut a door on it. I sat up, heart hammering, listening for movement outside. Nothing came. By the end of the week, I started wondering if the house itself felt different, like some part of my space was being observed quietly, without urgency, just a presence that arrived, hovered, and left. Then one night, it returned for the last time. I lay in bed with my eyes half closed when the pale glow pushed through the edges of my curtains again. Soft, steady, familiar in a way that made my pulse race. I slid the curtains open. The light hovered higher this time, just beyond the roofline, casting a faint sheen over the wet shingles and fence. Then slowly it lifted, as if responding to nothing but its own quiet timing, and drifted into the cloud cover above. The sky sealed behind it. The street stayed empty. No voices, no engines, just the distant hush of the ocean and the soft creak of my old house settling. I closed the curtains and stood there a long time, letting my eyes adjust back to darkness, trying to make any kind of sense of it all. Nothing else happened after that. No more pressing glow, no humming, no strange patches in the yard. But some nights, when the fog hung low and the curtains stirred slightly in the breeze, I still found myself staring at the window, waiting for that soft, shapeless light to quietly slide upward again. My headlights washed over something smooth and pale, hovering just above the center of the road like a low floating pane of glass, and for half a second, my brain refused to label it as anything real. It didn't look like fog or dust or a puddle catching light. It looked solid, reflective, perfectly even. As soon as I hit the brakes and leaned forward, it disappeared, leaving only empty asphalt and a faint metallic smell drifting through my open window. I was driving south through the Flint Hills outside Council Grove, the kind of stretch where the road dipped and curved between dark grass ridges and patches of scrubby trees. It was close to midnight, heavy summer air, no wind. I'd taken that route 100 times after visiting my cousin Marco, and there was never anything out there except deer and the occasional farm truck. I slowed almost to a stop, heart thudding, scanning the road like I expected the thing to snap back into place. Nothing. just blacktop and the weak white glow of my own beams. The smell stuck around, though, cold and sharp, like I'd rubbed a coin between my fingers. I told myself it was just glare from a road sign or heat shimmer playing tricks, but the road signs were a mile back, and the night wasn't hot enough for that kind of distortion. The longer I sat there, the quieter everything felt. Crickets that had been chirping through the fields a second ago went silent. Even the faint wind I hadn't really noticed before felt like it had stalled. I eased the car forward again. The smell followed a little, then slowly faded. My mirrors showed nothing behind me, just my own tail lights reflecting off distant grass. A few minutes later, the radio crackled. Not static exactly, more like the sound of a tuning dial being brushed slowly. I hadn't changed channels. It had been playing low local ads before that, and now it was just a soft, uneven hiss. I tapped the dashboard and turned the knob, but it didn't clear. It just got quieter until the speakers went dead. That metallic scent returned in a thin thread through the stale air. I rolled my window up a little, like that would explain anything, and kept driving, trying to focus on the white lines undulating ahead of me. That's when I noticed the clock on the dash looked off. I could have sworn when I left Marco's place it was 10:52. Now it read 11:41, and I hadn't been on the road nearly that long. I glanced down at my phone in the cup holder. No signal. Not even one bar. Just that hollow, no service message glowing on black. That never happened out there unless you went way farther south. The road curved left and dropped into a low valley. As I came down the slope, my headlights caught it again. The surface hovered in the middle of the lane about 10 feet ahead. Larger this time. Smooth. Almost pearly. It reflected my lights clearly, like a faint mirror, but it didn't shine back. Just swallowed the beams like they were sliding off wet stone. No way to judge depth. It felt like looking at something that wasn't supposed to occupy space. I slowed with trembling hands, foot barely touching the brake. The closer I got, the more that metallic scent sharpened, cold and sterile. When I was about 30 feet from it, it drifted sideways. Not forward or back, just slid slowly to the right toward the tall grass, still suspended, perfectly level. Then it faded, like someone lowering the opacity of a film until it was gone. The fields swallowed the darkness whole. I sat there with my car idling, throat dry, trying to process what I just watched move away like a thought changing its mind. A low hum crept up through the floorboards. Not loud, more vibration than sound. The steering wheel trembled faintly under my palms. My side mirrors quivered just slightly. The hum deepened for a second, then flattened out into silence. A cloud passed over the moon, and the road fell even darker. I swallowed and pressed the gas. The car rolled forward, tires whispering over asphalt. I didn't look to the sides anymore. I just focused on staying steadily between the lines, as if veering even an inch might trigger whatever that thing had been to come back. Every so often I caught flickers in the corner of my eye, like pale reflections far out in the grass, moving parallel to the road. When I tried to focus on them, they vanished. My phone buzzed suddenly on the console. No vibration sound, just the screen lighting up. It was a text from my sister Lila, timestamped 10 minutes earlier. "You okay? You left kinda weird." I stared at it, confused. I hadn't told her I was leaving that late. I typed back, "Yeah, just driving home. Why?" The message sat unsent. "Still trying," blinked beneath it. No signal. The smell of metal crept back again, faint but steady, like it had soaked into the fabric of the night. Another mile down the road, the reflectors along the edge all flashed brighter at once, lining the asphalt with a pale, unnatural glow. Ahead, the same smooth, reflective surface hovered again, lower this time, nearly grazing the top of the road itself. It didn't move as I approached, it just waited, silent and even, occupying space like it belonged there more than the night did. I slowed to a crawl. My breaths came shallow. The inside of the car felt too small. The hum returned, stronger now. The air around me pressed inward, thick and heavy. The headlights bent slightly against the surface, like light folding rather than landing. Then a few feet before I would have touched it, the surface lifted gently, almost lazily, and drifted upward into the dark sky. It didn't rush, it didn't dart. It ascended straight and steady until my lights couldn't reach it, until even the faint reflection vanished into black. Everything fell quiet again, no humming, no vibration, just the engine idling and my own breathing. The metallic smell thinned, then disappeared completely. I sat there longer than I meant to, hands still clenched on the wheel, eyes fixed on the empty spot where it had been. The sky looked normal, no stars blocked, no shapes moving, no sign of anything strange. Eventually, I forced myself to drive on. The rest of the trip passed in uneasy silence. The radio stayed dead. My phone kept searching for signal. A thin layer of sweat clung to the back of my neck, even though the air had cooled. When I finally pulled into my driveway, my porch light flickered once and steadied. The house looked exactly how I'd left it, quiet, still. As I stepped out of the car, the faintest trace of that metallic scent lingered around the hood, then vanished like breath in cold air. Inside, the clock read 12:06 a.m. My phone pinged finally as signal returned. 3 new texts from Lila, the oldest one timestamped from almost an hour earlier. You left in the middle of the story. Everything good, Eli? I stood there in the quiet kitchen, trying to line it all up in my head, trying to find the moment where time slipped, or the road bent, or that surface appeared. Outside, far off across the fields, something caught the moonlight briefly. A small pale shimmer, then darkness again. I didn't go to the window. The first time I noticed it, I thought it was just a trick of the light. I was sitting on a flat rock near the edge of Willowmere Lake, the quiet little spot about 20 minutes outside Fairhaven that no one really bothered with anymore. It was late afternoon, the sky overcast but bright enough to see everything clearly. A light breeze rolled across the water, pushing small ripples toward the shore, and the air smelled faintly like damp leaves and cold stone. Fall had just started to lean in, and the trees along the edge of the lake were beginning to lose their color. My name's Nolan Pierce, and I'd gone out there to kill time more than anything. Work had been rough all week, and I just wanted somewhere still enough to sit without hearing someone talk at me. The surface of the lake looked normal at first. Dull gray water reflecting a soft blanket of clouds. Occasionally a leaf would drift by, or a fish would break the surface and vanish again. Then something moved beneath it. Not a splash, not a ripple. A dull reflection, like a shadow sliding under the water, shifted sideways just a few feet from where I was sitting. It wasn't dark enough to be a branch. It wasn't sharp the way a fish's body flashes in the sun. It was more like a blurred shape, moving slow and smooth, like something passing under frosted glass. I leaned forward slightly, narrowing my eyes. The shape faded almost immediately, melting back into the flat gray of the lake before I could fully focus on what it had been. I waited. Nothing else appeared right away. I told myself it had probably been a cloud reflection changing with the ripple pattern, something natural, something forgettable. But my eyes stayed fixed on the same patch of water. A minute passed, then 2. Just when I'd started relaxing again, it came back. The reflection slid through the water again, this time a little farther out, moving horizontally, steady and calm. No splashing, no disturbance, just a shifting tone beneath the surface, like something passing between layers. My stomach tightened. "What is that?" I murmured, leaning closer to the edge. The dull shape wavered and disappeared once more. The water flattened out again, returning to its normal muted sheen. I stayed perfectly still, barely blinking, waiting for it to come back. The lake felt suddenly bigger, deeper. A faint sound of leaves crunching behind me made my shoulders tense, but when I glanced back, no one was there. Just the dirt path winding through the trees, empty and quiet. I looked back to the water. Still nothing. The breeze shifted slightly, brushing cold air across my skin. The surface of the lake rippled softly, reflecting the gray sky without disturbance. Just as I started to feel ridiculous for getting worked up over nothing, a longer stretch of shadow appeared beneath the surface, darker than before, passing slowly from left to right. It moved too evenly to be drifting debris, too smoothly to be a fish. It looked deliberate. I sat frozen, watching it glide under the water like something pacing just beneath where I could see. It didn't break the surface, it didn't form waves. It just passed, and then softly dissolved like the earlier ones. My heartbeat picked up, slow and loud in my ears. I crouched down closer, careful not to slip on the rock, scanning for any visible source. The bottom of the lake wasn't visible that close to shore. It just darkened quickly into murky depth. A chill crept up my arms. The air went strangely still, like even the wind had paused. Then another ripple began, but not from the surface. It felt like motion underneath, like a silent displacement, like a heavy presence shifting position. The dull reflection turned up one more time, closer now, around 15 feet out. It lingered slightly longer than before, then faded away into nothing. I exhaled slowly. "Okay, I'm done," I muttered. I picked up my bag and started backing away from the shoreline, eyes still locked on the water. Every step felt heavier than usual, like the ground had become less reliable. Behind me, the forest remained quiet. No bird calls, no insects, just the faint hum of the water brushing gently against rock. I turned once more, just to be sure I hadn't imagined it. The lake's surface looked calm and unremarkable. Then the water dimmed slightly in one narrow stretch, a faint path of shade that slid beneath the reflection of the clouds. It faded